Oi, pessoal, olha só a novidade.
Glinda e Elphaba saíram dos palcos da Broadway direto pras telonas.
Wicked ganhou uma adaptação cinematográfica de tirar o fôlego e você não pode ficar fora dessa.
Com as atuações de Ariana Grande e Cíntia Erivo e as vozes de Mira Ruiz e Fabi Bang.
Assista o Wicked a partir do dia 21 de novembro nos cinemas.
Verifique a classificação indicativa.
RH, quer saber como voar no trabalho? É só usar a Flash. Com a Flash, você concentra toda a gestão de pessoas em um único lugar. Faça a admissão dos colaboradores e solicite mais de 8 categorias de benefícios. Ah, e você ainda pode fazer todo o controle de ponto. Conheça o novo onboarding integrado da Flash em flashapp.com.br.
There are places where the world's most gruesome crimes have led to years, decades, and sometimes even centuries of supernatural activity. The victims seemingly reaching out from beyond the grave for justice. Those locations are in Creepy Places, a true crime podcast. And I am your host, John Grills. Join me in these creepy places if you dare, as we dive deep into the epicenter of true terror.
And welcome back to Horror Queers. We're talking, he's dead now because mommy killed him. We're talking, you don't need a stretcher up there, you need a mop. And we're talking, I'm into survival. And I'm Joe.
And I'm Trace, and we're talking, This is God.
Ooh, I do love Robert Englund's delivery.
Only a true diva would say, this is God about themselves.
I mean, this is the final entry in our godforsaken, forever going on theme. So, yeah, like, is the gay icon Freddy Krueger or Fred Krueger?
Do we want to claim Fred Krueger as one of us?
In this film, he's a little better because he's just a child murderer. He's not a pedophile. Confirmed yet.
I don't think he's technically confirmed pedophile until the remake.
That is true, yes.
Yeah, well, whatever. But nevertheless, everyone, yes, in our 8th and final entry in Divas and Anniversaries, we are discussing Wes Craven's original 1984 film, A Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah, technically, yes, this does have, well, if you want to count Fred, it's 2 divas between him and Nancy, but this is also the 40th anniversary, Trace.
40th anniversary. Oh my God. It always seems so like weird, like when we're getting to 40s. And I was like, wait, but then I'm like, oh wait, I'm like 5 years away from 40. So like, oops.
Yeah, you're fine. You're fine.
Okay, Joe, I can't believe we've actually never covered this film before, because as I think you reminded me when we covered New Nightmare on the Patreon audio commentary a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
We've got main feed episodes on 2 and Freddy's Dead and the remake.
Yes. And
we have audio commentaries on the Patreon on 3 and 7, aka New Nightmare.
That is correct, yes.
Okay, so we... I don't know, why did it take us this long, Joe?
I think we were just waiting for something big. I mean, sometimes we hold out on the really, really big titles, either for, yes, an anniversary like this, or in the hopes that maybe we'll get some kind of new installment or something that we can connect it to and justify. And yeah, so here we are, folks, with an anniversary, because I don't know that we will ever get another Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah, I am not holding my breath for another Nightmare on Elm Street, especially not one that's ever going to involve Robert Englund, at least not as Freddy Krueger, but...
I think we talked about this on that audio commentary for New Nightmare. We both made this kind of slippage where we said he might need to die before we can get a new one, just so that there's no possibility Robert Englund can ever come back.
Yeah, I think that might be the
so
case,
morbid.
But, do you remember when you first saw this?
My God, I don't think I do. I pretty sure it probably would have been the run that my sister and I did sometime in like the early to mid 90s when we were just going through the big three franchises. But I honestly feel like I just have always had this movie in my life.
Yeah, I definitely saw this in high school, and I remember lending it to a girl. But I don't remember exactly the first time I saw it, because I feel like I had known so much about it before I actually saw it. So, I knew Tina died. I knew Johnny Depp had the bed swallowing thing. I knew a bunch of all this shit. And so, but I always liked it from minute one. I mean, there's some movie magic on display here.
Oh, yes. I mean, there's a reason that this is a classic. There's a reason that so many of the moments, the characters, things have been replicated so often. It was actually kind of a joy to watch New Nightmare and this so close together because you realize, A, how good New Nightmare is in terms of evoking the spirit of this, but also just... yeah, this movie is a bit of a warm blanket, isn't it? It's reassuring to rewatch this.
Very much so. And honestly, it was kind of a thing where, because I have seen this movie a lot.
So many times.
Although I do think I've seen 3 more than one, but it was kind of a thing where I was gearing up to watch this, and I was like, okay, I'll just watch Nightmare again. I wasn't like super in the mood because, again, I've just seen it so many times. But I'm happy to report that, honestly, like 10 minutes in, I was like, all right, I'm geared up for this. Like, let's go, movie.
I kind of felt the same way. I thought, I could probably write this plot synopsis mostly off of my memory. And then you stick it on and you think, okay, yeah, here we go, whatever. Nightmare. I've seen it a billion times. And then you realize, 5 or 10 minutes in, I'm all in on this because it's such a fucking good movie.
It really, really, really is. Okay, well, why don't we just jump right in, Joe? And I'll just be totally honest here. I pulled almost all of this from that Never Sleep Again documentary. A very thorough, thank God for franchises and these kind of documentaries. I guess we can use that Chucky one too whenever we cover another Chucky film.
Indeed, yeah. It's always nice when somebody else kind of puts in all that work and you can say, fantastic, rigorous research, lifting wholeheartedly.
Absolutely. Okay, so why don't we start, though, by doing a little bit of backstory on Wes Craven? Because I don't think we ever really delved into him as a person in our Scream episode, so maybe we touched on a couple things.
I think we talk briefly about his background, like his education, and that's why he's so erudite, but yeah, like absolutely have at it.
So, okay. Wes Craven was raised in a fundamental Baptist, church society. So almost any social activities he participated in were always done through the church. And it was very, very religious. Shocking. Sure. But he wasn't even allowed to go to movies, though, because, and I quote, they were the devil's playground.
Of course, yes.
So during his first year in college, he came down with a very strange, unexpected paralysis and actually came very close to death. And this is when he started really exploring his creative side.
Okay.
His interest in film, though, didn't really happen until he started teaching college, so well after he had graduated. But the college he taught at had this art theater that showed old European films, and he would go to them, and it was watching these that he was like, oh, I want to be doing that. So... in the late 60s, he quit his job and he moved to New York City to figure out how to make films. And this is when he started working for a documentary company where he was hired to sync up the audio on dailies for none other than Sean S. Cunningham, the creator of the Friday the 13th franchise.
Interesting. For some reason, this is probably such a stupid thing, but I guess I just always default assume that the people who make the infamous franchises have some kind of competitive streak with one another. You never really assumed that they would have worked with each other or been in conversation with one another. I'm like, oh, well, you can't mix and match Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street.
Well, and it's interesting, right? Because Wes Craven would make a movie before Sean S. Cunningham, but then Sean S. Cunningham, no, because I guess I keep thinking Friday the 13th was so big in a way that Last House on the Left wasn't, but Last House on the Left was big. It just didn't spawn a franchise.
Yeah, and it's almost aiming at a different kind of market, right? It's so exploitative. And you could argue that Friday the 13th, the original, is trying to push buttons. We're taking out ads that are very inflammatory and all that kind of stuff. But I would say that one has better commercial viability, and that would be the one that does get the franchise. Yeah.
Well, okay, so... Craven's working for him. He eventually does graduate to an editing position and becomes, in Cunningham's words, a really good editor. But after working together for almost a year, they decided they wanted to make a movie together. And they were able to put some people together and form the Sean S. Cunningham Films Ltd. Limited?
Probably, yeah.
Sure. Well, Cunningham told Craven that the backers wanted a scary movie, and a scary movie was something that Craven had never thought about doing before. He didn't have any interest in horror before this.
Of course not.
But that's what the backers wanted, so he holed himself up in his room and wrote The Last House on the Left over the course of 3 days.
Oh, boy.
Yes. So after that movie came out and took the world by storm, Craven didn't make another film for almost 5 years because he was rejected at every turn because, Joe, take a guess, he wasn't pitching horror films.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a curse and a burden and also a gift that keeps on giving. So it's one of those things where I always feel sad when I hear that people don't actually enjoy making horror films, but it's the lane they've gotten pigeonholed into. But at the same time, then I look at Wes Craven's career and think, well, you really turned this into lemonade, didn't you?
Well, I think it's a thing, too. Like, he never looked down on the genre, per se. I mean, also bear in mind, he was directing quite a few porno films in the years leading up to this. But
right.
I think it was more, it's a job to him, and he was very good at his job. But
there we go.
It's a thing, though, like, anyone who might have taken his non-horror pitches that he was taking were so turned off by his involvement with The Last House on the Left that they said, no, we don't want to work with you.
Yeah, I mean, think about it this way. Like, nowadays, we have stuff like, from the executive producer of Insidious, The Conjuring Universe,
right.
Megan, and all this stuff. It's like, from the director of The Last House on the Left comes...
Music of the Heart.
There we go, right? It's like, it's a hard sales pitch.
But at a certain point, so again, he's spending 5 years trying to pitch. At a certain point, a friend told him he could get him money for another movie, albeit a horror movie.
There we go.
So he went off and wrote The Hills Have Eyes.
Like, oh, okay, well, you want me to do it again? Fine, I'm going to do fucking cannibalism this time.
Yeah, and so by this point, Craven had moved to California, and after Hills, he made the 1978 TV movie Stranger in Our House, or Summer of Fear, starring Linda Blair, depending on where you're watching it.
Mm-hmm.
Then in the early 80s, he made a 1-2 punch of Deadly Blessing and Swamp Thing back to back. And
okay,
with those two movies, he made enough money to take about 6 months off because he had, money. And
right.
It was during this 6-month period that he wrote and refined the script for A Nightmare on Elm Street.
Interesting. So he realizes that he still probably has to work in horror, but now he's going to take his time and do something that I guess is more appealing to him, or that he maybe just needs more time to refine. So
this is the one, at least, where it starts, because he came up with the idea for this. He pushed himself to write this script. It wasn't, hey, the backers want a scary movie. Can you go write a scary movie really quick,
Mm-hmm.
So the idea came from a few articles in the Los Angeles Times. The first article was about a young man who died in the middle of a nightmare. About a year later, there's another similar article. And 6 months after that, and this is the one that really kind of said to him, okay, make a movie about this.
Right.
It told the story of a young man who was having nightmares and was telling his family that there was something after him and that if he didn't stay awake, it would kill him. And his family tried to keep giving him sleeping pills, but he wouldn't take them. And one night, they're all watching a movie and he falls asleep on the couch. And so they carry him up to bed. Hours later, they heard him screaming. And when they opened the door to his bedroom, he was already dead. And Craven was like, well, that's my movie. That's what I'm writing about.
That's my opening right there. That's so funny because I feel like I always heard an urban legend that it was a Japanese gamer who was trying to marathon some kind of game, and he was trying to stay up. So he was drinking coffee and taking sleep suppressants and that kind of stuff. And he stayed awake so long that it ended up killing him. That was the story I always heard.
Interesting. I'm wondering, because, this is the early 80s. What game would that have been?
I don't know. And I never even thought to ask, which is the true nature of urban legends, where you just say, oh, well, I heard it. It must be true.
Yeah. Well, what I said is true. What you're saying is not.
Okay. Fair enough. You did the research.
Yes. So he had the idea, but he knew he had to have a killer, the face for this evil that was killing people in their dreams. And by the time he thought about this, Halloween and Friday the 13th had both come out.
Right.
And Craven noted that both killers in those movies had a mask. Though, again, he's saying Friday the 13th. I'm assuming he's referring to Friday the 13th Part 2 and then 3.
Yes, because by 1984, I'm assuming this movie is in production in 1983, but we still would have had at least one iteration of Jason by this point.
Yes. Because I think Part 2 was 81 and then Part 3 was 82. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. So again, so he knew he had to have a killer, but he didn't want to give the killer a mask like those movies. So he thought, oh, why don't I just have the killer die in a fire and his burned face will be the mask? Which,
Sure.
Yeah, put your actor in makeup for any sequel you might get. Although, important to note, he was not planning to do a sequel to this, and I don't think he ever wanted sequels to this movie.
Yeah. It's funny how that happens.
Yeah, right. But when it comes to the details of Freddy himself, I found this very amusing. Like, Craven had, like, a thing for every aspect of Freddy's look. So, Freddy was the name of a kid who used to beat Craven up as a kid. There's the name. Krueger sounded very German, this is in his words, and reminded Craven of a warplane in Nazi Germany, but it was also an extension of Krug, the main villain of Last House on the Left.
Right, yes.
His hat is the hat of a drunk man who used to scare Craven as a kid when he was walking down the street to school. The sweater colors came from an article out of Scientific American that said that the two colors, red and green, were the most difficult for the human cornea to, see when they were put side by side, or at least our corneas would be like, there's something not right about this color mix-up, which is interesting considering it's Christmas colors.
It is, but not often in this kind of stripy pattern.
Right, and it's also, the green is more of like a dark green, not the kind of like bright Christmas holly green, you know?
Yeah.
And then the claws. So as Craven calls them, claws, they were the piece de resistance. But he was thinking about something, and then he had a cat at the time. He saw his cat raise its paw and do like a little flex of its claws, and said, oh, that's it. Razor claws. There we go.
Interesting. Okay.
So he writes this script, and it is also getting turned down by studios at every single turn. Oh, yeah. Like, no one saw what he was envisioning here. The only person who believed in the concept was one Bob Shea, who...
Never heard of him.
I know, right? Everyone go back and listen to our Critters episode. I'm sure we've talked to him also in a bunch of these Nightmare episodes, but...
Oh, yeah.
Nevertheless, yes, he is the head of New Line Cinema, which at that time, though, was a 16mm distribution company, not a production company. That was essentially a storefront in Lower Manhattan.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, this is the movie that changes that company's fortune.
Well, and here's the thing, though. So because of what I just said, Craven didn't want them to distribute. They didn't want him to produce this film because he was like, well, if I go with you, you're going to give me 10 cents to make this movie. And I need more than 10 cents to make this movie.
Yeah, like you're a small company. What can you possibly do for me that a giant can't?
Mm-hmm. So he went back to Hollywood to try to get a different backer. But again, like no one got it except for Bob Shea, who absolutely believed that Craven was onto something, but there was one problem. Bob Shea didn't have any money.
Yes, that is a problem when you're trying to make a movie.
So Shea spent months and months and months trying to get money together to shoot Nightmare. He found a few different backers and actually did get all the funds. And here's the thing, though. So one of the major investors was an English company called Smart Egg Productions that was contributing nearly half the budget.
Okay, risky.
They get everything together. They're in pre-production. Filming is set to start in 2 weeks, and Smart Egg backs out of all of their financing.
Yep, saw that coming.
So, they're unable to pay their pre-production crew that's working. So, the line producer, John Burroughs, actually put up his own money via credit cards to ensure that the crew did get paid. But
no,
they're still like, hey, like, are we going to start filming in 2 weeks?
Mm-hmm.
So then Shea went to this company called Media Home Entertainment, who were big home video distributors at the time, which I found interesting because I was like, wait, when did VHS really, really start?
Not yet.
I guess maybe they would have had home video things for like educational videos, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, the way that we look at home video is synonymous with the rise of VHS, which happens, just past the midway point of the 80s, but there were still equivalent, like you could still put out things. It's just the tapes were really expensive. They weren't mass marketed. And you're right, there were things like educational videos.
Yeah, so it looks like, so VHS cassettes were introduced in 1976, but it probably would have taken at least 5 years before they were even like moderately affordable.
Well, yeah, because remember, we had to have the Betamax wars as well.
Right. Okay.
Children, this was where we were at. You couldn't just watch something.
I know. So this Media Home Entertainment, though, this was owned by a guy named Joseph Wolf, and Shea convinced Wolf to foot the rest of the bill lost by Smart Egg with the understanding that Wolf would take over the entire project if Shea didn't get his financial commitment together in the next 3 to 4 weeks. So within 2 weeks of filming starting,
Okay, so the pressure is on.
Pressure is on. I was getting stressed out listening to all of this. This was awful.
It's one of those things where you know it'll be okay because we get the movie and we're watching the documentary about it. But like, if you were living this, sleepless nights.
Exactly. So Shay then goes back to Smart Egg, and these are his words, browbeat the head of that company into putting up the last few $100,000 so that wouldn't happen and Wolf would not take over production of this film.
Like, hey, motherfucker, where's my money? You promise, or maybe we had a contract, but also pay up.
Exactly. So one of the conditions when they got their money, though, was that they would need a name or two so that they could sell the film in foreign markets. And that's when they turned to John Saxon.
I was going to say, you've got that guy who has appeared in all of those Dario Argento movies.
Well, it's interesting because Ronnie Blakely, like, she was, like, Oscar nominated for a Robert Altman film, I think Nashville. And so, like, but she wasn't the name that Saxon was because Saxon, I mean, he was a well-known actor. He was part of the studio system before he disbanded in the 60s, and he was a heartthrob.
Yeah, and goddamn, he still looks good in this movie.
Absolutely looks good. And surprisingly enough, though, Saxon was actually excited and willing to do this part.
Oh, good. Okay. I mean, that's always a bonus, right? When you have to seek out a name and they actually care about the project, it feels like a double win.
Exactly. So when casting Freddy, though, Craven first thought to hire a stuntman for the role, but realized very quickly that a stuntman couldn't tap into that demented part of their psyche to actually do the role. And that's just... They couldn't act it, you know? Stuntmen and acting... I mean, sorry, stunning is acting, but it's a different kind of acting. And definitely, like, it's not walking around like Michael Myers, you know?
I was going to say, I feel like this is a contextual historical piece, right? Where we really looked at stunt people as people who didn't act, they just did stunts. And I don't think we would ever refer to them as such now because we understand there is a performance to the stunts, but also those stunt people can now also become more quote-unquote conventional actors.
So, at this point, Robert Englund had already acted in about 12 to 15 movies, but he was co-starring in the V miniseries, which gave him his first taste of celebrity. Now, here's the thing, because I've never seen any iteration of V. I think I watched the reboot when it came on, like with Morena Baccarin, like 10, 15 years ago, but I didn't know there was like a V miniseries and then also a V television, like weekly series.
Oh, yeah.
So, the thing is this. So, England had a hiatus between the end of the miniseries and the start of the weekly series. And so during this hiatus was when he went to go audition for Nightmare on Elm Street.
Okay. Huh.
Before he walked in, he used ash from the ashtray in his car to put dark circles under his eyes. And during the audition, he says he just stared at Craven. Like, he just stared at him.
I can be menacing.
But I don't know. Like, I don't know if he ever did any dialogue, if he read any screenplay pages, because apparently after he walked out, Craven just goes, "That's the guy." So
that is wild, though, because the thing I associate with Freddy is, like there's a level of physicality, there's a sense of menace, but Freddy is the verbal killer. Like, how do you not cast someone if you don't know that they can deliver this kind of vocal performance?
Well, and the thing is, though, because this film is a bit of an anomaly compared to the rest of the franchise, because his voice still sounds like Robert Englund's voice, whereas in every future film, it's like the really deepified voice.
Yes, folks, if you want to hear our attempt to do the Freddy voice, we both tried in that audio commentary for New Nightmare, and I kind of think we got there by the end of like 2 hours.
Yeah, but I also my throat was hurting by the end of that. So
true. Yeah.
Good on you, England. Now, for the physicality of his performance, he was inspired by Klaus Kinski's performance as Dracula in Werner Herzog's Nosferatu. Specifically the way he hung his neck. So like the way kind of Freddy hunches, that was inspired by Klaus Kinski in Nosferatu.
Interesting.
But then he added the swagger of Jimmy Cagney.
Right, as you do.
Freddy's makeup was done by David B. Miller, who had done 5 different mannequins to researching burn victims to see hey, what do we get? What do we want to use here? But Englund knew that the makeup would be very extensive and he would be quite literally hidden behind it. So he decided to make his eyes very expressive to represent the humanity of Freddy.
Oh. That's funny because I will honestly say I don't know that I've ever noticed his eyes in a significant way when I've been watching this film, but I can't say I've been paying attention that way.
Well, yeah. Well, next time you watch it, pay attention.
Okay. Thank you. Very helpful.
No, I think you say, because this is also a movie where Freddy isn't front and center for a lot of it, we're not doing the Jaws thing where we're not showing him, but we're also not focusing on him in a lot of the shots, at least.
That is true. Yeah, we're doing a lot of hidden in the shadows, or we're doing an arm, or we're doing a quick glimpse. But, obviously there's the big showstopper numbers, but more often than not, it does feel like we're saying what keeps him scary is seeing only occasional glimpses of him.
Yeah, and then 2 comes out and brings him into the real world and just blows that whole thing up, so...
Well, we're not going to talk about continuity between the films because this is a franchise that's not great at that. But I would argue few horror franchises are great at keeping their continuity in check.
Honestly, y'all, follow the book of Saw. Saw's really good at continuity.
Because they retcon a bunch of shit. I was going to say Scream is better, but...
Oh, yeah. I guess I'm thinking... Well, I was going to say longer running franchises, but I guess we do have 6 Scream films, so...
Well, 7 on the way.
Production, by the way, was a very quick one. They had 32 days to film with a budget of $1.8 million. And
so tiny.
They also knew, hey, this is a 90-minute movie with 80 special effects shots, so it was going to be a lot of work.
Everybody hustle.
God, I know. And so the interior of Nancy's house was built inside Desilu Studios, and that's where most of the filming took place. They built the whole house, first and second floor on the stage. Exteriors, like the front yards and stuff, they were shot in West Hollywood and in Venice, California.
Okay.
Whereas the boiler room was a power plant in the basement of the Lincoln Heights jail.
Oh, I feel like we knew that for some reason.
We might have when we were going, because the climax of 2 takes place in a boiler room, and I feel like it was different than the one they used in 1, and that's where this came up.
It's definitely different.
Yeah. Now, by the end of the shoot, there was growing discontent with the crew because they were falling behind and running out of money. So, Sean Cunningham came to shoot second unit stuff just so they could make their schedule.
Right.
Bob Shea directed the sequence where Nancy runs up the quicksand stairs because he really wanted that shot in the movie, but Craven was like, I don't have time, dude. If you want this in the movie, you got to film it yourself.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It was probably delivered more nicer than that because Wes Craven was a very nice person.
It was all hands on deck. If you want that, I'm going to need help.
Yeah, but they do make it. They do edit it. The MPA made them cut 2 things, and they cut seconds. This is all it was. So seconds off of Johnny Depp's blood bed. So I guess at some point, the guys, they just said, you have to cut it off here.
Sure, arbitrary.
Yes, and then there's a shot of Tina when she falls, when she dies, and she hits the bed. And we see in the version we've seen, we see all the blood splatter all over Rod's face.
Yes.
There's a shot of Tina hitting the bed where you just see her hit lands in the pool of blood and the blood just sprays. That shot had to be cut.
That is so funny because as you were describing it, I was like, I just watched that. I saw that in the movie.
Well, and so there are DVD cuts, and I don't know if there's a Blu-ray cut, but there's at least DVD cuts that have both the R-rated and unrated cuts, which again, the unrated cuts are mere seconds longer than the theatrical cut. So you may very well have seen that shot. I don't know. I did not on mine.
I feel like one of the things, especially with these tiny little minuscule cuts in action sequences or gory sections, is that if I didn't see it, I probably just filled it in mentally, and I'm sure that I saw it as a result.
Yeah. The power of suggestion.
Exactly, yeah.
So everything seems like it's going okay, and A Nightmare on Elm Street is set to open on November 9th, 1984. But the week before the film opened, the lab they were using to make prints would not release the negatives because they hadn't been paid yet. And
I was going to say, that money has got to come back and get it again.
Yep. And New Line did not have any money to pay them, so Bob Shea again worked out some kind of deal to get the lab their money. Otherwise, there would have been no prints in any theater screens. So Bob Shea was hustling to make this movie. So honestly, it's so funny because I feel like I don't get Bob Shea confused with Harvey Weinstein a lot, but I think Harvey Weinstein is tainted the way I view studio heads and producers like that. And so I always my gut reaction is to be Bob Shea, that asshole. But he's actually one of the nicest ones apparently.
Right. It seems also like he must have been relatively easy to work with because I never hear any stories about people having issues with him and they keep going back to work with New Line, even though it is still a very small company.
Yes, you are correct. Again, there's still that storefront in New York. And they even had to bring the editing stuff over to New York because they didn't have Los Angeles offices.
Jesus. That is not a short trip.
No, not at all. So A Nightmare on Elm Street opened in 165 theaters, again, on November 9th, 1984, against fellow newcomer Silent Night, Deadly Night. And
heyo, our audio commentary for the month.
Absolutely, everyone. Go to that Patreon. Which also 40th anniversary. There you go. But it opened in the number 10 spot with $1.2 million, making it, and this is funny, an instant commercial success. Because again, only 165 screens. So like with a 1.2 million gross, like that per screen average was really
big,
good.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. So the widest release it had, based on what I could find, was about 380 screens. And by the time it did that, people were lining up down Broadway in New York City just to see this movie.
I love it.
And it stayed in theaters for a while. It goes on to gross a total of $25.5 million at the domestic box office and $57 million worldwide. Again, against that budget of $1.8 million. Like, this was a cultural phenomenon.
Mm-hmm. And what do we call New Line as a result?
The house that Freddy built.
There we go. Because that is cash, man. Like, name a recent film in the last decade that has made 25 times its production budget.
And it's so funny because I was like, okay, I know it's the house that Freddy built, but I thought they were doing more like things besides just Freddy during the 80s, and they really weren't. Like the one thing they did that they tried to break out of the Freddy stuff, not break out of it, but like add something to it, was Critters.
Yeah. Which also kind of works for them because they turned that into a franchise too.
They did, absolutely. But then it was the 90s where they started really doing more horror stuff. But then they talk about how Seven was like one of their big ones, where it was kind of merging horror with thriller. But then, they got Final Destination. They got a bunch of other shit. Really interesting stuff. There's a 20-minute featurette on New Line's like kind of horror journey from Freddy through like the early 2000s that is really interesting.
Oh, okay. Good to know.
But yeah, critical reception was positive too. We are looking at a 93% on Rotten Tomatoes with an average score of 7.8 out of 10. And Letterboxd users have given it a 7.4 out of 10.
Okay, sure. I mean...
Yeah. Look, I just looked at a Twitter thread earlier this week where it was a girl basically talking about how there wasn't a good horror movie made before the year 2000 because they were all boring. So
yeah, I think a lot of people just died, and then we all said, okay, it's the internet. Let's not overreact.
It very much is, but I do think that mindset has bled over into some Letterboxd users. Or I'm sorry, the people that have that mindset have found Letterboxd.
There we go. Yeah. They're corrupting it. Letterboxd used to be so reliable for boosting.
Well, because it used to be a cinephile thing. Now it's an everyone thing.
Yeah, it's a normal file. That's what we call them, right?
Yeah, just people. But, okay, Joe, what happens in this movie?
All right. So the film begins with dirty hands constructing a glove made of finger knives. And then we get the title card. So right away, front and center, it's Freddy. But again, this could be second unit hand model shit.
I actually do like that we get to see him make the glove for the beginning, too, because I feel like, I don't know. I mean, it's not necessary, but it's a good way to spend your opening credits.
Sure. It's a good way to set the scene.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, so we get no pretense. We go from this title card and the opening credits, the glove making, directly into Tina's first nightmare. And of course, Tina is played by the fantabulous Amanda Weiss.
Yes. And I don't know, because we're not really supposed to know this is a nightmare yet, I guess?
No.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
She's just a teenage girl who's out at night in a nightgown and you think, ooh, she looks vulnerable. So it's definitely preying on all of the kind of slasher tropes, even though I will say I recognize that this film is absolutely a slasher film, but I do feel like it stands apart from a lot of its slasher brethren to the point that I always just want to add like a little asterisk or a caveat to it. And
no, I agree with you though, because yes, Tina gets sliced and diced, but like no one else really does. Rob gets hanged, Johnny Depp gets swallowed. Like, I guess maybe at the time this would have been seen as a unique twist on the slasher. Well,
yes.
I guess there would have been a formula by this point because this comes out the same year Friday Part 4 comes out, and we're well past Halloween too. So yeah, there would have been a formula. So I guess that maybe that's what some of the reviews at the time were saying. Like, oh, this is a really like a fresh take on the slasher formula.
Yeah, it's hard to put ourselves into the mind space of audiences and critics at this time period. But like in 1980 and 81, those are the peak years for slashers. Like that's when the majority of them are released. Even though we'll say, the 80s are dominated by slashers overall, they're really actually starting to taper out by about the midway point of the decade. But by this point, I think 80 and 81, there's anywhere between like 40 and 50 slashers that come out both of those years. So people are just like fucking tired of slashers. Like, they're on overload. So by the time Nightmare comes out, yeah, it's doing some of the same things, but it's so fresh and novel because of this verbal killer who doesn't wear a mask, but also all of the dream stuff just automatically augments this. I'm not going to say elevate, but it takes it to a different place.
Hard agree, yes. And I like your use of augment. Absolutely better than elevate.
Because it's still doing the same thing. It's just doing it in a slightly different way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so we've got Tina, and she is running down this dirty corridor. She's in her nightgown. I do love this imagery of her being startled by sheep. We hear sheep on the soundtrack later on, and part of me is always like, oh, this is Wes Craven being cheeky because you count sheep to go to sleep.
Well, it's interesting, because it's not far removed from what the franchise would become, but like these nightmare sequences feel much more like surrealistic, and they're not as, I don't want to say not as creative, but they're less oh boy, they feel less like set pieces to me, and they're not as effects heavy as what we would get in the later sequels. So I think what I appreciate about the nightmare sequences in this film is that we rely on more these weird things, again, like hearing sheep within a place where they shouldn't be, like a boiler room. Like it's things where you're like, oh yeah, I can tell this is a dream, but it's not like the whole world changes around them like it will in future installments.
Yeah, and for that reason, I think I would probably challenge you on your use of the word surreal, because I feel like this is actually really grounded. So often the transition between waking life and nightmares are almost indiscernible because they look like the real world. Yes,
no, okay, you're right. Let me clarify. So they're grounded with surrealistic elements thrown in to clue you into the fact that it's a dream.
Okay. You mean like Freddy and his giant Alongo arms?
Yes, absolutely that. or it's like, like how you walk out, like, because there's some geography around Nancy's house where it's like you can walk out, or maybe it's Tina's house actually, where you can walk out and, look, there's an alleyway in the front yard,
Yeah. I mean, space is definitely malleable, and that's one of my favorite aspects of this kind of dream-like imagery in the film is, even when it looks like we're doing things in the real world, if we see that we're moving between places that are geographically not close together. Like, I do love that moment late in the film when Nancy jumps off of a ledge in the boiler room factory and she's falling out of her window onto the hedges, the rose bushes in her front yard. And you're just like, those spaces don't match. No. And that's what tells you, oh, it's a dream.
And I love that. Like, it's so unsettling.
Yeah. Okay, so Tina's moving through this boiler room, and we are seeing that she's being stalked by a shadowy figure of Fred Krueger, who will not be named until way late in the movie, but I'm naming him now because I don't want to keep saying shadowy figure.
Yeah, I like that you pointed out that we do refer to him as Fred a lot. I mean, he's even credited, like Robert Englund, as Fred Krueger. I think it's only Nancy that calls him Freddy at some point.
Yeah, and it's not even consistent. So I think most of the time it's Fred, and then sometimes it's Krueger, and then I think like once or twice it's Freddy.
I wonder if it's a thing, because I also think they refer to him as Fred a lot in the second movie as well. I wonder if it's kind of a thing where people in the real world, like not in the movie, were calling him Freddy Krueger, and so like the films adopted that. So it's kind of this like weird like meta thing that like where life carried over into art.
Right. I mean, we've seen it happen before where fans take ownership of something and it becomes so popular, it becomes incorporated back into the source material, be it movies, comics, books, or whatever. Yeah. I don't know. I would love to know if people know when we started saying Freddy as opposed to Fred. Okay, so Tina is startled awake by her mother, who is played by Donna Woodrum, and this is because she's having a nightmare. And yeah, folks, we're going to spend probably a fair amount of time in this episode talking about shitty parents. Because what is the Elm Street franchise known for, if not the worst fucking adults in many horror films?
Yeah. And I've seen some reads of this. I didn't get too deep into it, but it's very much, this is post-Vietnam War, so it's kind of mirroring like, the government lying to America, it's parents lying to kids, and what are the consequences of that? If you're lying to someone to protect them, but that doesn't always work out, and as is the case in this movie.
Well, yeah, and I would argue it definitely extends into all of the authority figures in the film, right? It's not just like, oh, okay, so Marge led a lynch mob and we killed this child killer. It's also, you can't depend on the police. You can't depend on your sleep scientists. So, even school teachers are not really there to help or protect you. So this feels like a failure of authority, which is in some ways very YA. The kids have to look out for themselves. But I think it's also very telling as a culture, like this is where America was at. We had lost faith in the people who were supposed to lead and protect us.
Right.
Okay, so all this to say, her mom is concerned for Tina. Her not stepfather, I think he's credited as mom's boyfriend in the credits, but
Sure.
This dude is like, hey, come back to bed so we can get to fucking.
Okay, because Tina's nightgown has been clawed open by Freddy's, claws, and
Yes.
her mom's advice to her, oh, you gotta cut your fingernails or stop that kind of dreaming. I'm like, okay, Mom, like...
Super useful. Thanks. Take that into consideration. Okay, so we get this kind of hazy glow when we transition, and I love this technical effect. It looks dreamlike, but technically we are actually in the real world. But this is our introduction to the nursery rhyme that we're going to hear, the 1-2, Freddy's coming for you. These little girls jumping rope, and they're not characters, and it doesn't even seem like anyone acknowledges them. And I love that blurring of, oh, is this real or is this a dream?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think we only get these girls here and
twice
at the very end, right?
Yeah.
And both times they're accompanied with this haze effect you're talking about, which I agree. I love the way, I don't love the way it looks because it looks like clouded, but like for the effect it's trying to give, I love it.
Yeah, the effect is great and the look is giving it daytime soap opera.
Very much so.
Somebody put Vaseline on the lens again. Get it off.
But we get to meet our kids here. And I do wish we had more time with them, like as a unit, before we started killing them off, because I forgot how quick.
It's so fast.
Well, I forgot again. This 90-minute movie, like this movie flies by. But yeah, so we at least get a little bit of them interacting with each other.
Yeah. So this is our introduction. It's our kind of walk and talk on the way to school. So we have Tina relaying her nightmare to her friends. Glenn, played by Johnny Depp, still looking cute, not problematic yet, so we can objectify him. And then, of course, we have Nancy and Trace. I'm going to get it right. It's Heather Langenkamp.
Langenkamp, yes. Hard G on that.
Yeah, folks, the running gag in the audio commentary for New Nightmare is my tongue could not pronounce this last name, so...
You just kept saying Langenkamp, and I was like...
Langenkamp.
No, okay, so because I know in our commentary on Nightmare 3, I came down on Langenkamp because I love Nancy, and I think that Langenkamp is a fine actress. I don't think she's a great actress, but I do think she kind of drops the ball in some parts of 3. I think she fares better in 7.
Right.
But I do actually think this is her best role. I think, like...
Oh, you're walking it back because you said that about New Nightmare.
No. I guess, I don't know. It felt like she was a little out of her depth sometimes playing a psychiatrist in 3, whereas I feel like this role as a teenager does suit her. Like, I love Nancy in this movie.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. I mean... It's so easy to identify with Nancy. It's so easy to rally behind her as she, ascends to final girl status. And I mean, I attended a sort of pop culture evening put on by Rue Morgue back in the day where they would do almost like the Fantastic Fest debates where people have to pick a side on a contentious issue. And the debate topic was who was the best final girl. And I was just like, this isn't a debate. It's going to be between Nancy and Sydney, so it's a Wes Craven win.
That is. I guess though he didn't write Sydney.
That is true. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But as we have talked about numerous times in our Scream episodes, you've got Wes Craven's fingers massaging and helping, I think, Williamson to construct these characters and flesh them out. But I really feel like we see this, watching this opening, I feel the way that other people feel about the girls in Halloween for this crew.
Okay. But I'm sorry, do you not feel the way about those girls in Halloween?
I like them. I just always feel like people want to give it a little bit more credit. Like, I think that there's good stuff there, but I don't know. I think in both films, I want more of these characters because I genuinely believe in the relationship.
It's so funny to hear you say that because I was thinking while watching this, when I say like I wish we had more time with them as a unit before they started getting killed off, I was thinking in my head like Halloween.
Like Halloween. In that case, I would argue that both films are doing something really well and like the actors are embodying these characters in a good way, because if you want more of characters, then the movie has made you invest in them.
Well, and I do think that, because Halloween is also a 90-minute movie, but at least, again, for those kids who were saying that movies made before 2000 are boring, I do think that Nightmare on Elm Street is less quote-unquote boring than Halloween because we get to the action much faster.
That is true. That is very true. Yeah. So Tina is telling her friends, which comes to include her crude boyfriend, Rod, who is played by Nick Corey. So she's telling them about this nightmare. She and Rod end up quarreling about this. The details are kind of not important. You just need to know that they're bickering, and this is maybe the nature of the relationship. But he almost immediately ducks out. So we're left with the impression that the real friendship is between Tina and Nancy. And then Glenn is there because he is Nancy's chaste boyfriend.
Hey, yes, Johnny Depp is super cute. I always thought that in this movie, but like Glenn is not much of a character. Like
he's not.
I like his scenes with Nancy because we actually get to get something from him. But like, I don't know anything about this kid at all, except that he falls asleep a lot.
Yeah, he watches TV with the headphones on, and he only cares about women if they look hot, but he doesn't care what they have to say.
Oh, yeah. Who cares what she says, Mom?
His mom's like, you scoundrel.
I thought that got a laugh out of me.
I mean, they're funny because they feel like genuine interactions, albeit, we look at this and say, what a grosso dork.
Not in the 80s.
Not in the 80s. Okay. We end this conversation with Nancy and Glenn reassuring Tina, hey, everybody's got bad dreams. Don't worry too much about it. So I do love this moment. I completely forgot about this line. Tina wonders if there's an earthquake on the horizon. And we get that line before we move into the sleepover. But I was just like, fuck me. I thought we just wrote in the earth tremors that happen in New Nightmare because that was what was happening in Los Angeles at the time.
Yeah, well, yeah, because that actually had an earthquake happen while they were filming. So they used that footage in the movie. So I caught that too. I was like, oh, earthquake.
Yeah, because in hindsight, I remember us talking about that the earthquake was always in the script, even before they had the real one in 94. And now I realize, it's because we were fucking paying off this line in the original.
Yeah.
All right. So, yes, we're having this sleepover. There's a funny moment where Glenn has to lie to his mom because obviously he's staying over at a girl's place.
See, these moments are so good. I was, because my husband's obviously seen this movie a bunch too, but he walked in like during this scene and just started laughing.
It's genuinely funny, especially because the girls cannot keep a straight face either, and they refuse to try to help him. He just digs himself deeper and deeper with the sound effects tape, and it's genuinely funny.
Yeah. Now, okay, so then we have Nancy and Tina. Like, they kind of talk about their shared nightmares, and
yes,
it is weird to me that Nancy does not really clock.
Why doesn't she believe Tina?
Yeah, well, also because, okay, so you've had a nightmare about Freddy Krueger. We've seen Tina's nightmare with Freddy, which is pretty rough, and how she's affected by it. Yeah. And so I get that we have not seen one of Nancy's nightmares, but I'm always, every time I watch this, I'm always like, why isn't she as bothered by Tina is? Like, unless it's like a thing where maybe the nightmares get, like, they start out innocently enough, but they get progressively more intense the closer he gets to actually killing you, you know?
Yeah, I've always wondered that too, because it does seem like when he's targeting you, that's when the intensity of the dreams creep up. But that's just something we've kind of made up collectively. Like, we don't have proof of that, but it does seem like Nancy should be more concerned. Like, if somebody tells me a beat for beat recap of my dream where a threatening man is trying to kill me, it's going to seem odd. I'm going to pay attention.
No, absolutely. But again, because this movie kind of introduces that idea, as we'll get to in the end, but it's like, okay, well, how much power do you give Freddy Krueger, you know, with your brain? And this kind of carries over into like Freddy versus Jason, where it's like, oh, like Freddy can't kill anyone because no one's afraid of him anymore. No one remembers him. So yeah, maybe that's the thing is like, you know, the more exposure you have to him in the nightmares, the more power you give him and the stronger he gets.
I definitely think that makes sense, but it's ironic that it feels like a part of the mythology that we introduce softly here, and then the other films really pick up that ball and run with it.
Yeah, I mean, because truth, I won't lie to you. Like, I've always found the ending of this movie a bit anticlimactic.
Yeah, it almost seems like we don't quite know how to do it, and we'll get to it.
Yeah, we'll get to it.
Okay, so yes, the girls are talking, and then we get this pretty obvious fake out jump scare with Rod tackling Glenn because, of course, he's trying to scare them because Rod is a fucking asshole.
I think he's a lovable asshole, though.
Oh, sure. I mean, he's like the bad boyfriend that you fuck until you graduate, and then you're immediately like, oh, I can do better. I can do more mature. Yeah. Never mind. You don't need a Rod in your life anymore.
But he's not like that character you see in so many horror films. He's not like the, the Travis Van Winkle in Friday the 13th, the remake, who I love to hate that character, but like he's a hateful character, and that's not what Rod is. Yeah, he is, as you said, he's just like the bad boy.
Yeah, and maybe this is one of the reasons that I also do often tend to prefer Nightmare on Elm Street. It's my favorite of the 80s franchises because the characters do seem just a little bit nicer. You know, there's nobody in this film where you think, well, that person's a total fucking asshole, except for Nancy's mom.
Man, it's so funny too, because I tried to look up some contemporaneous reviews, and there was quite a consensus among a few of them that were like, the mom is the worst character in the film, and she does but it was also like a critique where it's like her scenes don't work. Like I
disagree.
I disagree too.
Strong disagree. Marge for days. Like, this is a character I love to hate in this film. I do think that she's also empathetic because you know, she clearly has a lot of guilt. She's dealing with some PTSD about what she did.
She's a single mom. She's an alcoholic. Like,
yeah. Like, she's got some shit going on, but also bad mom of the year. Like, I was looking at her and I'm just thinking, I think the only worse mom in a really celebrated horror film of this era gotta be Carrie's mom.
I was gonna say Carrie's mom, right? But
yeah,
no, actually, well, I guess it's not this era yet. But it's not the mom. Oh, I was thinking the doctor from Friday Part 7, the psychic one.
Oh, yeah, that one's shit. That's a surrogate mom who's bad for days.
Yeah. But yes, agreed. But yeah, okay.
Okay, so Rod and Tina, this is also very cute, right? Where they make up, they agree that they're not going to fight anymore, and just immediately go and have very loud sex. And you just think, this is not very kind to the friends that you have forced to stay over because you were scared of your nightmares.
I also like because you said the chased Glenn earlier, but like, did Nancy and him ever really talk about having sex?
It's unclear. He looks like he kind of wants to make a move because he saw Rod making a move and he thinks, okay, well, maybe this can happen for us as well. And Nancy's clearly not into it right now. And you can very much feel the kind of slash your fingerprints of, oh, well, the final girl doesn't sleep with anybody. She has to remain chaste in order to fight the villain. Like, I feel the Carol Cloverness of it here.
Yeah.
But also because Nancy she's not thinking about that kind of shit right now. And it feels like Glenn tries, gets rejected, and then the rest of the film, they're almost better friends than they are romantic partners.
Yeah, a little bit.
We say I love you, and I don't entirely believe it later.
Yeah. I mean, this seems like a matter of convenience because he lives across the street.
Well, yeah, you know, they probably grew up together. They were promised to marry each other when they were 5 years old or some shit. And then because he's right there, why not keep it up? Yeah. Okay, so yeah, we get some loud sex. It's keeping everybody awake. Feels a little performative, but whatever. And then we get Rod actually being a little bit vulnerable in the pillow talk where he admits, yeah, you know what? I also had a nightmare because guys can also have nightmares. Yeah. And I appreciate this moment because we're going to lose Rod pretty quickly, not just because he dies, but also because he becomes a suspect. So we can't trust him or he's always on the run. Yeah. But I like that we give these characters these beats because they make them feel like real people.
I mean, that's the thing. Yeah, all these characters, even Glenn with his non-characterness, at least they feel like real kids, you know? They don't feel like archetypes yet.
Yeah, which is strange because I'm like, well, why is this so much more successful? Even as we say, we don't know that much about Rod. We don't know that much about Glenn. We don't know Jack all about Tina because she's about to die. But I still care about all of them. why don't I feel that way with so many other, particularly slasher films? Like, what is this film doing that's so right?
I mean, maybe it's just that authenticity of just like, it's set in like, what, Springwood, Ohio? Oh my God, one of them's The Simpsons.
Springfield is The Simpsons.
Springwood, Ohio. I don't know. I'm going back to what I'm saying about, like, there's not any archetypes here. There's not, this. I mean, I guess you could say, Tina's the slutty one, but she's not.
She's not.
She's not slutty. Like, they just feel like people.
Yeah. Know what this kind of reminds me of? A slightly less funny Fright Night.
Yes, that's actually a really, really good example, because that film does a similar job with its teenage characters, even though they all look much older than teenagers. But yes.
Well, yes, as they always do.
I mean, I think Langenkamp was 20 when she filmed this, so that's actually that joke she gets later when she's like, "Oh, I look 20 years old." It's like,
right, psych. If you know, you know. But I will say, everyone in this film does look either nearly age appropriate or just a little bit older.
Yeah.
Like, Langenkamp looks age appropriate. She looks so young.
If you told me she was 17, I would have believed you. I mean, but again, the difference between 17 and 20, like, I mean, in looks, I don't think is that much, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, maturity, emotional maturity, maybe, but not looks.
Yes, absolutely.
So in the night, Tina is woken up by pebbles against the window, and this is actually intercut with the outline of a man that is pressing out of the wall above Nancy, who is sleeping in Tina's bed.
So this effect. So if you remember, Joe, when we covered the remake, I feel like we were pretty forgiving with a lot of the badness of the remake, and I'm still on the level that it's like aggressively fine, not like a travesty, but...
Yeah, I think we were in agreement that they kind of focus on the wrong characters.
Oh, they absolutely do. But we did have a big issue with some of the shitty-ass CGI in that movie.
Oh, boy. Yeah.
When they redo this scene, this shot,
bad.
It's atrociously bad. And I was even more furious after finding out how they did this.
Okay, how'd they do it?
So they're like, we're trying to figure out how to do it. And then there was this like relatively like new on the market cheap fabric called spandex.
Oh, my God.
That we put... And that's what we used. So we just had a stuntman. It wasn't Robert Englund, pushing his head and arms through some spandex. That's how we accomplished this scene.
Trace, it looks so fucking good.
And I think a part of it too is the way it's lit too. Like again, like, Nancy's in the bottom of the frame. It's so good to the point where you're like, okay, you just use spandex. Why didn't we? If we're gonna redo this scene in the remake,
just
do spandex again. Just fuck it, man. Like fuck
it. Because everybody thinks that computer-generated shit is cheaper and faster and easier, and it'll look the same, and nobody will notice. And then we all notice because it looks fake as fuck, and it's not as convincing as practical. You could have just used spandex, motherfuckers.
Spandex. And that's the thing, so many low-budget movies, and which this is, mind you, it breeds creativity because you have to look for cheap ways to achieve good effects. And, sometimes that doesn't happen. But in the case of this, we do. Like, this is a cheap movie with some fantastic-looking effects.
That's the thing. You show me this movie and then without any kind of context, ask me what the budget is. I'm not saying under $2 million.
Absolutely.
This movie is rich in special effects that look expensive. It looks like it's dripping in special effects jewels.
Yes. And I think critics picked up on that too, because I also saw a lot of reviews that were kind of like, it's shot very sophisticatedly.
AKA does not look cheap.
Yeah. Not like the shitty horror movie, all these slasher movies we've been getting over the past 2 years.
Well, I mean, to be honest, I've done not a deep dive, but I feel like I have taken some time in the years of our Lord 1980 and 1981, because I taught a course on slasher, so I tried to, beef up a little bit so I knew some of the heavy hitters. And there are some that honestly, they just look cheap because they were shot very quickly with amateur casts and they didn't take the time to do great writing, so the characterizations aren't great. And there's a novelty, there's a joy to some of those because they're so low budget. You just say, cool, fuck it, and you run with it.
Right.
But then you watch something like A Nightmare on Elm Street and you realize, it can also look really fucking good when people put the time and energy into it.
Which these people definitely did.
Which they fucking did, and they barely got it. So, miracle movie here. Okay, Tina is lured outside. This is where we get the Freddy who's backlit so that we're only seeing the outline of him. Do the arms look convincingly real? No. Is that the point? No.
Yeah, no. I think the kind of shoddiness of the way this looks, which I don't think it looks bad at all, but it adds to the kind of, again, the freakiness of the nightmare.
Yeah, because it doesn't make sense. You look at it and you think, no, that is so wrong.
They held his arms up, or I'm sorry, whatever was standing in for his arms with fishing rods, by the way.
Of course it did. That's great. I love that. Yeah, so he's doing like all sorts of cat and mouse shit, you know, popping up in front of her, threatening her. I feel like we're getting a taste of who Freddy will become with the wisecracking and that kind of stuff, where he does chop off his own fingers and calls himself God and that kind of stuff. Like, that feels like a precursor to the wise ass Freddy we'll get in subsequent entries.
But that's the thing, you know, I get it. It really comes out in 3. Like, the Welcome to Primetime bitch, I think, is like the thing.
It's iconic. Yeah, for really, good and bad reasons. It
really kickstarts, yes, the one-liner jokey Freddy. But yeah, I mean, there are jokes here. I just think, though, that the tone of this movie is much more...
It's serious,
yes. And not to say that 3, 4, and 5, not 6, but 3, 4, and 5 are not serious.
They have moments.
But they have more levity in them. I don't think this one really has that. Like, we're at least not in Freddy's scenes. Freddy's scenes have no levity. But we do get those one-liners a little bit, so it's I can see what they were tapping into to evolve that for the sequels.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like in the sequels, the spectacle also lends itself to an almost over-the-topness, which I can appreciate as a viewer who enjoys the razzle-dazzleness of it. But, you know, if you ask me in a pinch, do I prefer something like this, where it's girls being chased down the street by a really intimidating figure? It feels closer to the slasher trends that we're coming out of, but also it feels scarier. Like, there's something campy, there's something enjoyable, there's something often comedic about the way that Freddy will kill people in sequels, and that includes, like, number 2.
Yes, absolutely. And what is even scarier to me in this scene, I forgot we even do this, is that when she pulls his face off and we just get like a skull, this is a puppet, but like it looks so good.
Well, and we hold on it just long enough to understand, oh, she just ripped off his fucking face and that's not a human being. And then we're cutting because we know we don't need to linger on it because we don't have that kind of massive special effects budget.
Well, exactly. Because if we linger on it, it's going to look worse the longer.
It's going to look bad.
100%. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. That's so funny because I thought what you were going to say, like the scariest thing that I find about this sequence is when we cut to Rod's perspective and he is woken up by a screaming Tina because she's having this nightmare, and he pulls back the cover and we've seen her tussling with Fred.
Under the covers, yeah.
Yeah, and then when he pulls it back, she's just there by herself, and then we see the close-up of the slash in the abdomen.
Okay, that might be the best effect in the entire movie. Like, this actually looks like this girl's stomach is getting clawed open.
And I always remembered it being... for some reason thought of it as like a puncture or a tiny scrape, and I'm conflating it or confusing it with what happens to Nancy's arm, but this is like boobs to navel. It is deep and long.
It's really rough, and again, like, that fucking Katie Cassidy redo in that remake where it's like, I think we're doing it over her clothes too, so we don't get the image of like actual flesh being sliced.
Yeah.
But there's also something about Weiss's performance here because her screams are so guttural.
It's terrifying. She sounds genuinely terrified.
It is, this is a very scary scene. And it's so effective because, of course, yes, we have her going up the wall and...
Oh my God, I love it. I love it so much. Tell me how they did it.
Okay, so Tina's rotating room. The idea came from a Fred Astaire movie called Royal Wedding, where he dances...
A Fred Astaire movie. I love it.
Okay, again, so not everyone's going to know what Royal Wedding is.
Right. Sorry. Or even who Fred Astaire is, unfortunately.
Exactly. Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers, y'all. There you go. But anyway, so in this movie, he dances around a rotating room to make it look like, he's on the ceiling and stuff. And so they were like, cool, we're going to do that. They spent a month building the framework and a room inside of that framework. And anything in the room that could move or flop around like curtains was starched to hell or pinned down. They strapped Rod down on the floor and had his hair totally lacquered. And there were 2 jump seats that were bolted to the wall along with the camera. And the cameraman was strapped into one of those chairs, kept the camera on, and moved around with the room as it rotated.
This is wild. This is the kind of thing where I look at that budget and the fact that we were scrambling. it's such a huge number of shots that we had to get it in a reasonably short time for this production. And I just think, no, I scrap this sequence or I make it less difficult because that sounds impossible to do.
You build a rotating room? Like, okay,
No.
like, sure. But you know what, though? They were smart because this room was repurposed for Glenn's room whenever the blood pours out of the bed.
Of course it was.
So at least they got to use it twice.
Yeah, see, that's money and time well spent right there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, so obviously this is quintessential. This is defining for this franchise. So we get to watch Tina go up the wall, over the ceiling. She's screaming. Rod is reaching for her. We see Nancy and Glenn waking up. They're trying to pound on the door, but it's locked. And then Tina dies and she just falls like a puppet onto this bed.
And this is 20 minutes into this movie.
Yeah. When you said, oh, this is a 90-minute movie and it just goes, I always forget how quickly Tina dies. In part, I think because Weiss is so good and her death really hurts, but also because it feels like we should not be killing this character this early.
Yeah, and this is very much meant to be, okay, we're doing the Janet Leigh and Psycho thing. However, I do wonder how many people like paid attention to like marketing and posters, because the tagline for this movie is, if Nancy doesn't wake up screaming, she won't wake up at all, which would clue you in. Like, it doesn't say if Tina doesn't wake up screaming.
Yeah. If anything, that poster or that tagline just tells us, okay, Nancy is the main character. Who the fuck knows what's going to happen to the rest of these kids?
Yeah, but again, like, this is a movie where like Nancy does not seem like the main character up until this point.
You are so right. I was thinking about that because I feel like we've had this conversation a couple times recently where people are trying to not pull the rug out from under audiences, but maybe a gentle wool over the eyes of, hey, did you think that person was the lead? Psych, they're dead. Okay, so Nancy and Glenn do break in at this point, and we see the damage, and Rod has run. So the window is open, he is gone. And then we go to the police station, and this is where we're introduced to Nancy's divorced or separated. They never really say.
Yeah, they never really, like, we don't even know when they separated / divorced. Like, we don't get any of that information.
No, I mean, in truth, as we've alluded to, we don't actually know a ton about most of these characters. So does John Saxon have a house? We'll never know because we never see it.
Who knows?
But yeah, I mean, this to me is very much a, hey, we're into the Reagan 80s. Divorce is starting to become a big issue. And I can't help but feel like this movie is doing some subtle commentary on, oh, well, Nancy doesn't have a solid foundation at home because her parents are divorced and she can't rely on either one of them because their attention is divided.
Yes.
So all this to say they're either divorced or separated, but we have her father, Don, who was played by John Saxon, as well as Marge, who was played by Ronnie Blakely. And I do, because we actually got a criticism recently that we did not talk about Olivia Hussey's gorgeous Black Christmas hair. So I'm going to say Ronnie Blakely has gorgeous strawberry blonde locks, and she is giving me a mixture of Piper Laurie and Virginia Madsen.
Okay, I was going to say Virginia Madsen too. Albeit, okay, she's so tanned though, isn't she?
She is very tanned, yeah.
Like, I was like, girl, like, were you at the LA beach while you were filming this movie?
I know, right? Like, was the character Marge day drinking and fell asleep in the sun a little bit?
Actually, that should have been an insert shot. Like, we should have just had a scene of her, like, passed out by the pool, like, just with a bottle of vodka.
And to be clear, like, we're going to talk and probably mock a little bit of the depiction of alcoholism in this movie, if only because it feels like the film is so aggressively coming down on it. And this is the start of Bad Parents on Elm Street, but Marge is a fucking disaster.
Literally every time she pulls a bottle of vodka out of some crevice or towel or whatever, I laugh every single time.
Well, because Trace, what does it remind you of 10 fucking years earlier?
Oh, Black Christmas and Mrs. Mack.
Yeah, like I have in my notes, I'm just like, we're pulling vodka out of closets.
Yeah.
We're doing bedtime vodka on the nightstand. Yeah, like, I'm willing to bet she has bottles hidden in the toilet.
Those are big ass bottles, though. At least Mrs. Mack had the decency to, like, have personal size bottles.
That's the thing. Mrs. Mack was subtle about it. I'm sure everyone knew she was hiding booze, but, like, she had airplane bottle size. These are full size bottle.
Like these are like liter, like 2 liter bottles, and like there's even a part later where like she's in the kitchen drinking, but then she like stands in front of it to hide it from Nancy, but then she just gives that up after like 2 minutes.
Yeah, not convincing, Mom. You're a mess. Okay, yeah. So obviously, Dawn and Marge are not super psyched to see that their daughter was at a very horrific crime scene. I do enjoy that Dad's first question is, what were you doing shacking up with 3 teens in the middle of the night? Because this follows a question by Rod when he shows up at the sleepover where he insinuates that there's an orgy happening. And I get that we're just having fun because teenagers are sexually active, but it also kind of feels like we're trying to suggest that all these kids are fucking.
I think so, yeah. But it's like, look at Glenn and Nancy. They're so chaste.
That's the thing. Like, nobody's looking at these kids thinking, oh yeah, they're definitely DTF. No, none of that. Okay. Yeah, so Nancy is pretty upset, obviously, rightfully so. Her best friend has been killed, but she explains that the fight between Rod and Tina was not that serious because we have all just immediately looked at Rod and said, well, the room was locked, he was the only one in there, and then he fled the crime scene. So Rod is now actively being searched for prime suspect. So in the morning, Marge is very worried because it doesn't look like Nancy has slept, and we do see that there's a citywide manhunt for Rod. It's on the news as we go to school.
I'm so happy this does not take up too much of the runtime because this is the least interesting part of the movie.
Yeah, it feels like if we did a remake of this and not the 2010 version, we would try to Haddonfield, Halloween Kills this shit a little bit and be like, let's spend some time with the other adults and, talk about what's going on Elm Street. Maybe do a neighborhood watch where evil dies tonight. Thankfully, we're not doing that. So instead, Nancy is just like, cool, bye, drunk mom. I'm going to school because I need something to take my mind off of this. I never caught this before. She's actually being observed by a man as she walks, but then she gets distracted because she gets pulled by Rod into the bushes. But this is clearly the police supervision that her dad has set up to try to catch him.
Oh, that makes absolute sense.
Yeah. So Rod tries to explain, no, I didn't do it. There was somebody else there, but I can't tell you what he looks like because, he wasn't actually there. But we don't get very far into this because, Dad shows up and we arrest Rod in the middle of the street.
Yeah. Which, all right, bye, Rod.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So we go to school and Nancy is struggling to stay awake because, she had a rough night.
Well, Lin Shaye is just not very like awaking in her voice,
I mean, for some reason, I had it that Lin Shaye was the hall pass.
No.
But yeah, so she's the English teacher, naturally, because it is a YA text. We are doing the thing where we study something in class and it has a bearing on the plot of the film.
What?
So we're talking about Hamlet and how Hamlet is probing his mother's lies. Very subtle. But yeah, we don't spend hardly any time on this because Nancy, we don't know it because we don't do transitions that way in this film, but she has fallen asleep and she sees Tina bloodied in a transparent body bag beckoning her into the hall.
Yeah, and that's what I like. Again, what you just said about this movie is that, going back to that conversation we were having earlier where it feels very grounded, like the line between where real life ends and the dream begins is always blurred in this movie.
Yes.
Whereas, I feel like what we'll get a lot in like later sequels is it'll be like, or even the remake where it's like, someone is like, I don't know, sitting at their chair, and then their whole surrounding changes around them, and then we get this the rapid zoom out where it's like, oh, you're in a nightmare, and that's just so much less interesting to me because it's not like I like the constantly wondering, like, is this real? Is it not? And I think this film is the best at using that as a plot device.
Yeah, and in some ways I have to think, and I could be corrected by people who know the craft, but I have to think that this is an easier way of doing it technically because you don't need to add in extra things, right? You just continue as is, but then you're introducing the horrific, the weird, the uncanny into the mix, and that's what makes it so unsettling.
Exactly. So yeah, we get this Tina's corpse in the body bag, but then we also have her like, because we get a lot of Tina's voice throughout the film calling Nancy's name, and it's very hypnotic, like Nancy.
It is, and it's not something I've really caught on previous watches. I do think this was one of the first times I've watched the movie with subtitles on, so you're catching all of it. But yeah, we hear a lot of Tina and Glenn after they've been killed.
Point out Glenn whenever we get to it, because I don't think I caught those.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, it's often repeated lines of pre-existing dialogue.
Right.
Like, Tina here is very much a siren, like, Nancy, come to me. I'm
Come to the
secretly
boiler room.
Freddy.
The music room! The music room!
Go to the fucking boiler room. I think my favorite shot in this movie is no one picking up Tina's legs and dragging this body bag and just leaving the streak of blood.
I love that. Also, again, like the little touch, like she turns the corner, to go follow Tina's body after what you just mentioned. And then all of a sudden, like there's just like dried leaves all over the floor in the hallway. Yeah. Like it's not something that's so weird to where you're like, well, that's unusual. But again, it's something that's off. It's just something that's off about this normal setting we're in.
Exactly. Something's just not quite right. And it's visually distinct enough that we can immediately pick up on it, but it's not like, oh, hey, there's a goblin over there.
Yeah. But yeah, so we had this other woman wearing a Freddy sweater being like, where's your pass? Screw your pass. Blah, blah,
Screw your pass, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Famous line. We get it.
Good stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So Nancy ends up coming down into this boiler room. It does transition to look more like the sequence that we saw in Tina's nightmare at the opening. And then we end up getting trapped in this kind of alcove in front of a burning fire. And Nancy burns herself on a pipe. And this is when she wakes up screaming in class. But when she exits class, because she's like freaked out and she just needs to leave, she does notice that the burn is really there.
Yes. And I guess I'm even thinking too, because so the only nightmares we get in this movie after Tina dies are Nancy's nightmares. And I guess that's something I kind of wish we had for Rod and Glenn. Like they both die in nightmares, but we're not there with them. And we never get to see them like interact with Freddy at all. And that's something that the sequels will do differently, right? Like pretty much everyone gets their own big set piece and usually they die in it. And that's not what we're doing here.
No, and I thought about this because I clocked it too, even when we get to the sleep clinic and we see Nancy having a nightmare, but we don't actually get to go into it with her because we stay with her mom. It's an interesting creative choice, and I can't help but wonder if, again, it's because we're trying to reduce the amount of special effects, we're trying to keep the pacing of this production on schedule, but I think the ultimate reasoning is that it focalizes everything through Nancy's perspective. So we are really aligned with her.
Absolutely.
As opposed to like getting that extra insight into Rod or Glenn.
But I do like that dream like lab sequence though, because I think a question for a lot of people is, okay, well, what's happening in the real world then when they are in these dreams? Because, as when Tina dies, we see Freddy under the covers with her in the quote unquote real world. So again, I won't get too bogged down in the logic because the film kind of makes up its own.
Yeah.
But not in a way that I find annoying or unsatisfying.
Yeah, it's just enough information that I can accept it without making complete sense because I don't ultimately need that.
Yeah,
Okay, so we're skipping class. We've got this burn on our arm, but we need to talk to Rod. So we go to the jail and Nancy quizzes Rod a bit more about what he saw. This is where he talks about, like, I couldn't identify the person because he wasn't actually there, but I could see her getting attacked. And then he also admits that, yes, he did have this nightmare about Freddy. So previously he had said, I had a nightmare, but he didn't elaborate on it. And then here he agrees with Nancy, that nightmare the two of you were talking about, I also had that same thing. So we're drawing the connections. People are talking about their trauma, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
Okay, so Nancy reassures him that she doesn't think that he did it as she leaves, and then off we go. So we're in the bath because, we've had a long day. And it's interesting that we heard this nursery rhyme when Nancy left to go to school, right? But she doesn't actually know it. So she's kind of picked up on it subconsciously. And I love that connection where in some ways, we are doing some dream warrior shit where I think she's pulling things in from other people or she's processing things subconsciously. So she's singing this. She's about to fall asleep. I love that we see the phallic fingers come out, obviously heavily sexualized because it's between her legs. But in any other film, we would just do an attack sequence or we would draw this out longer. And I love the cheeky playfulness of Claus going back under the water when Marge knocks on the door, and then we do it again.
Well, because I guess it's supposed to represent, like, okay, she wakes up, so therefore, like, his glove goes back. But yeah, there is something very, this isn't the right word, but like DIY, I guess, about like watching his hand like retracts like that.
Yeah. Like,
like, oops.
Whoopsie daisy, I'll just hide under the water for an extra beat.
But at least she falls asleep immediately after her mom leaves. And then she gets pulled into this chasm, which this, I always wanted to know if this is actually Heather Langenkamp in this scene, because we do get boobs in this shot when she's getting pulled under. Oh, yeah.
Then I'm guessing it's probably not.
Yeah. Unless it's one of the, because it's really quick, but nevertheless. So the way they achieve this look, they use black plastic sheeting on the bottom to make it look endlessly deep.
It's really effective.
This is like, there is a name for the phobia where it's like you're afraid of like not the ocean per se, but like the bottomless depth of the ocean.
Sure.
I don't have that, but like
but this movie could gently trigger it in you.
A little bit, yes.
Yeah. It's so great. And of course, we've seen this in countless other films since then, and maybe we had seen it before now, but it's striking and very, very effective. And it works because it is so simple, right? Like, we don't need Freddy swimming at her or creatures or something. It's just this idea that she is so open and vulnerable, which is already something we knew about because she's in the fucking bath and we've all seen Psycho.
Yes.
Also, I do love the fact that Marge offers her warm milk and Nancy just says, gross. I thought of you.
I don't drink warm milk. I drink cold milk.
I know you like milk, so I thought of you.
I do love milk. I do love milk.
Okay, yes, so warm milk, not cold, but yeah, I like this moment where she goes under the second time, and then it's interesting because it seems like this is an opportunity for her to put aside differences with Marge, because Marge is banging on the door. Nancy just got attacked and she's gasping for air, but instead, when her mom comes in, Nancy just plays it down, like, no, I can't trust you. I can't confide in you. So instead, she turns to drugs, Trace.
Oh my God. While she's watching The Evil Dead on TV, by the way.
Yeah, I was trying to figure that out because do you think we just asked a favor or did we license this?
I don't know. I was trying to figure that out too, because I know The Evil Dead had a really weird release history. Like it comes out in 81, but like that was like a school screening. Like it doesn't get like released, I think, until 83, or at least like get a really wide release or something like that. But I was like, would it have been playing on TV at this point? Like in 84?
Maybe. I don't know. This is interesting because, I mean, folks, we also covered The Evil Dead on the Patreon as an audio commentary, but I don't think we really went into a lot of the release of it.
Yeah, that's something, again, I just noticed one of those things where it's like, oh yeah, they say 81 or 83 is the release dates for The Evil Dead. But I'm like, that's 2 different years.
Clearly, there was something going on there.
Boy. Oh, actually, the first VHS release of The Evil Dead was released by Thorn EMI in 1983. So they would have had a VHS, and probably would have been expensive as fuck, but they had a VHS of this.
Okay, yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so Nancy is starting to consume, I'm going to call it Sta Awake, because there's definitely no Y on that bottle, but it's clearly meant to be Stay Awake.
Sta Awake.
Sta Awake.
Sta Awake.
It sounds like what a pretentious like New Yorker would say, like, darling, you need to stay awake. Okay, so Glenn does startle Nancy by sneaking in her room because The Exorcist was on, but all the good stuff, no, sorry, that's the wrong Wes Craven title. He marvels that she still hasn't slept, so he is concerned about her. I don't know that we do a fantastic job with the makeup to make her look increasingly more tired. Like when she says at one point that she's been awake for 7 days, I said, girl, no, you have not.
They do add under eye makeup later. I don't know if I see it in this scene. I definitely notice it in the back half of the film.
Okay.
And it's like, like a quick, like almost like not quite a bruise on her lower eyelid, but like, we're getting there.
The dark circles, they're coming in.
Yeah. Glenn, by the way, awful boyfriend, awful night watchman.
Truly fucking terrible. Yeah, so she makes him promise that he's going to watch over her while she sleeps. And then, we see her venturing out onto Elm Street. And it's funny because if you know to pay attention, it's evident right from the jump that he has also fallen asleep, because she calls out to him and says, "Glenn, are you there?" And he peeks out from behind a bush. And you think, okay, well, that means that you're in the dream with her, you dumb shit. So clearly you're both asleep. And again, we're hinting at Dream Warrior shit. But if you don't know, then this just seems like, oh, okay, so we decided to venture out into the street in search of the killer.
But okay, yeah. I always forget he's there in the front yard being like, oh, I find that odd that we don't play with that for the rest of this movie. But okay, that's kind of cool.
I truly don't think that they were thinking of it that way, but this is obviously part of the dream because she doesn't leave the house. Like, we will see her wake up in her room.
Yeah. And, she walks down the street and, oh, look, the jail's right there.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, so I guess she's like, yeah, okay.
It's almost like she's doing, what is it, astral projection or something?
Yeah, it's kind of like that. But nevertheless, I mean, she gets to the jail, and, this is when we see a pretty cool effect of Freddy walking through these prison bars.
Yeah, and he acknowledges Nancy as well. So this is definitely his domain. He gives her a little bit of a smirky laugh. And we get some great gross out effects because Tina is also here, and she beckons at Nancy, and then a big old centipede crawls out of her mouth.
And then there's like a bunch of muddy snakes at her feet for some reason. And like, sure, why not?
I mean, God, what did Tina fucking do to deserve all this shit?
I know, her poor body is just being mangled over and over and over again.
Nancy, help me.
It's the music room.
Go to the fucking boiler. So this is when Nancy is like, oh, fuck, I'm totally in a dream because that's my dead friend. So she calls out to Glenn, wake me up, Glenn, help me. And of course, we cut back and realize, oh, no, he's completely useless. He's fallen asleep as well. So she runs home, and this is where we get the oatmeal stairs, and they look great.
Okay.
I mean, they don't look the best, but it is such a great, like, to me, this is the best example of dream logic.
It is. Okay, because truthfully, like, I know we all have like recurring nightmares, and I think I've told you about this before, but like one of my it's a constantly recurring nightmare for me is that I'm running either from something or to something, but there's a force pushing on my chest. So it's like I'm wading through something, but it's just air.
Right.
So yes, this, I think everyone can relate to this scene. I just, even as a kid, as a teenager when I watched this, I always hated it because you can see the outline of the oatmeal steps before she steps on them. Like that always takes me out of it.
Yeah. It's a little unfortunate. Actually, you know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of The Invisible Man. Remember where they did the footprints in the snow and they had that elaborate procedure for how to cover them? And
so that's what I was like, okay, what they should have done was put something like, because I think it's carpet on the stairs. So they needed to put like basically like a very thin piece of wood with carpet over it to at least hide the outline. But given that we know, Bob Shea directed the scene because they were running out of time. I think it was like, look, you wanted the movie, here you go. We don't have time to make this look better.
Oh, I thought you were going to throw Bob Shea under the bus and be like, well, if Wes Craven had directed this, it would have looked better.
No, well, no. If they had the time to make this look better, it would have looked better.
Yeah. I mean, quibbles aside of how readily you can identify the outlines, watching her struggle up these oatmeal stairs it's just so great. Yeah. Like it adds another level of viscosity or visceralness to this film.
Okay, because also this is something that I always forget every time it happens. So while she's like, I think it's either right before she starts stepping up or it's like when she's actually stuck. But Freddy like knocks out the window of the front door and he's wearing Tina's face and talking in her voice.
Yes, I never realized that before either. And it's like, it's almost like he's got this prop of her. And then when he realizes, I'm not convincing anyone with this, he just throws it off.
Well, because here's the thing, though. I mean, because you can only tell it's Tina because of her voice that's coming out of the mouth. But like, it just looks like a big rubber face on his face. It doesn't look like Tina's face.
Yeah, I mean, know what it reminds me of? Leatherface.
Leatherface, yeah. Which, I guess, we're just 2 years away from that sequel.
There we go. Okay, so she ends up running upstairs, and then it seems like maybe she's fine, but when she looks in the mirror, this is when Freddy bursts through. We end up on her bed. Of course, again, this is a kind of sexualized violence, so this fear of a man that we know is dangerous, attacking teenage girls, getting onto their beds in the middle of the night, and so on. So this is, Ooh, suburban nightmares for parents.
Mm-hmm.
He ends up slashing her pillow, and this is when the alarm goes off. So we wake up, and there's feathers in the air. Marge comes in, and of course, she's none the fucking wiser.
Yeah.
Glenn has run off by this point, but not before Nancy calls him a shithead.
I thought she called him a bastard.
She calls him numerous things because she is rightfully pissed off. She's like, you had one fucking job.
As she should. But it's okay because now we got to worry about Rod.
Yeah, so they realize that he's in danger because of what she saw in the dream. So Nancy and Glenn rush to the jail. This is when they berate this front deskman, Garcia. Unfortunately, Dad comes out. We can't find the keys. And meanwhile, we're catching glimpses of this sentient sheet wrapping itself around Rod's neck, and then he just gets strangled to death.
So, again, this always bothers me because, they run and they're like, oh, he killed himself. And I was like, where is the rest of that sheet anchored to?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And if it's far away from the window, how did he do that? Maybe you should think about that, policeman.
Mm-hmm. It's funny because I almost think it would have been a more convincing suicide, if that's truly what Freddy is trying to fool people into thinking, if we had have kept the sheet at ground level and you could actually just strangle yourself against the bars by laying flat on the ground instead of trying to fake like you've been hoisted up and so on.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I have not thought about the logistics of killing myself in jail because I hope to never be in jail.
Yeah. Never say never, but yeah.
I mean, I'm covering a lot of true crime these days, and it's shocking how often people end up in jail in real life. So
just a little bit, yeah.
But yeah, not on my checklist. Okay, so Rod is dead. Freddy really did him in quite easily. Yep. And so we cut to a funeral. I noticed that we don't see Tina's funeral in this. We only see Rod's funeral.
Which is interesting because Rod is not even Nancy's friend. I mean, he's her friend, I guess, but not her best friend.
So here's the thing. I don't think that they were really good friends because that's why we don't ever hear Rod's voice or pick up an object representative of him when we go into the boiler room later. We only get something from Tina and Glenn.
He's just collateral damage. That makes sense.
I mean, it's kind of like when your friend starts dating somebody that you tolerate, but you don't actually like, and you kind of hope that they break up.
Right.
That's the impression I get of Rod.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is not a very well-attended funeral, although most people do think that he killed Tina, so I guess that's why. Yeah. So after the funeral, Nancy tells her father that the killer is still on the loose. She tries to describe this man because, of course, now she has seen him in person. So she says, a burnt man with a hat. And this sets Marge off on the drinking.
Oh, both of those parents, they clearly know exactly who she's talking about.
Yeah, it's one of those, don't say anything. We'll talk about this later. But oh, fuck, how does she know?
And then we just go right from here to the sleep doctor.
Yes, we go to the Katcha Institute for the Study of Sleep Disorders. And this is where we're introduced to Dr. King, who is played by Charles Fleischer. And Trace, do you recognize the name?
Okay, I do recognize the name, and I was looking at him, and I was like, he is so familiar.
You shouldn't recognize him for what he looks like, but rather how he sounds.
Oh my god, I'm so stupid. He's Roger Rabbit, right?
He's Roger
Roger Rabbit.
Also, that doesn't make you stupid because you couldn't immediately place a voice.
No. But I remember Charles Fleischer because there was another person in this movie that I was like, oh, he's in another movie, and it's one of the deputies at the very, very end who John Saxon puts in charge of guarding Nancy.
Okay.
He's the deputy in Scream that's licking the ice cream or smoking with David Arquette.
Really? Oh, yeah. That's fun. Okay. Yeah. The only reason I recognized Fleischer is just because the name stood out. I was like, I know we have talked about that. That name is very familiar. So yeah, looked him up. Roger Rabbit
is wild. Yeah. I'm looking at him right now. Yeah. He was before this mostly well known for a recurring role on Welcome Back, Kotter.
Okay. Which I've never seen.
I've never seen it either. But I think it's where John Travolta got to start though.
Okay. Interesting. Anyway. So this is basically Nancy doing a big old favor to her mom. So Marge says, darling, you need to trust me. You can trust me. Just do this thing for mommy because she's a fucking ludicrous bitch. But Nancy agrees. So we put her under and then we stay with Marge and Dr. King in the booth. And this is where we get a little bit of exposition about what are dreams, their mystery. It's a bit mumbo jumbo, if we're being honest.
I love that this Ohio town has a fucking, like, dream lab.
Oh, sure. Yeah. No, it's... Where else would you put it? This is where you could get the funding from the government. So we're chatting it out. We're having a gay old time. And meanwhile, Nancy is fighting for her life on the other side of the glass. So they end up waking her up when her vitals spike. And it's like they're way out of proportion for how you should normally be if you're having a nightmare. So they managed to get her awake, but now she has a slash on her arm, a streak of gray in her hair, and look, Trace, she's brought back a hat.
Which, again, like, the mom is so stupid. She's just like, I don't know where she got that hat from. And I was like, bitch, like, did you see her bring it? Did she pull that out of her ass?
Yeah, like, I did not plant this hat in advance, Mom. I'm not performing a fucking magic trick. So we head back to 1428 Elm Street, and Nancy decides she's going to confront her mom. So she knows that Mom had a reaction to the hat, the burnt man at the funeral. So Marge keeps stressing that Nancy just needs to sleep or she'll get crazier. It's like, fuck you, Marge.
Word choice.
Yeah. So this is when Nancy pulls the hat out of the drawer because Marge did not at all convincingly say, oh, I got rid of the hat. It's like, bitch, it's in the drawer right behind you, right near the bottle of booze.
Vodka. She should have just put the hat on the bottle of booze.
Truly. Hey, oh, Mom, this will make you pay attention to it. You have to get past the hat to get to the booze now. So Nancy doesn't mince words here, so she does talk about how Fred Krueger's name is in the hat. She talks about maybe getting sauced, and that might help her to relate to her mother, so Marge does slap her.
Oh, this was a real slap, too. Like, both Langenkamp and Blakely are on this documentary. Like, we were just really into the scene.
I mean, it's a good scene, because it feels like we're finally addressing some shit. I do kind of feel like Marge has gone from mildly concerned mother to, oops, I heard Fred Krueger saw the hat, and now I'm a full-blown alcoholic in the space of about one scene.
But it's also, because here's the thing, because it's important to remember, she helped kill Fred Krueger, so this is also bringing up the fact that she murdered someone. And
yeah.
So I think that's something I didn't really, like, put together until this viewing, because I'm just like, oh yeah, we killed a fucking child murderer, like, good for y'all. Mm-hmm. But this is probably something that has weighed on her, at least. I mean, clearly not her ex-husband, but, like, right. I think that's partly why she's an alcoholic.
Yeah, and it's tricky. I don't know that I want a bunch of extra scenes with her and John Saxon unpacking any of this shit. Like, I can't remember the remake well enough to know how much we talk about it. I do think we get more scenes of the mom kind of trying to address it.
Yeah, but it's Connie Britton, and I don't think there's a dad character in that one.
Right.
And Connie Britton is very underused in that movie.
True, but she is a raging alcoholic, from what I remember.
I don't know. I don't think she is. I think so. That's the thing. I think they remove. If she is, it's not on this level. Like, and so it's the thing. I think they took the most interesting thing about the mom character and just got rid of it.
Oh, shocker! In that remake,
exactly.
So all this to say, yeah, mom and daughter not in a great place after all of this, and Nancy absolutely realizes she cannot rely on her mom. She cannot confide in her. She cannot ask for help from her mother because it's just not going to happen. Because her mom is just saying, oh, well, he's dead. He can't hurt you. You just need sleep. And Nancy's like, bitch, sleep is going to kill me.
Well, maybe.
Yeah. So she throws the hat at her mom and she breaks the bottle and she storms out. So she and Glenn go for a walk. And this is where Glenn dispenses some other exposition that might prove helpful. So we talk about a Balinese approach to dream skills. And this is the idea that if you turn your back on a monster, you'll take away its energy and it'll disappear. Helpful. Okay.
Yeah. Well, put that in your back pocket for the very end of this movie.
There we go. Yeah. So, you know, obviously this is just floating a theory. If you're watching this for the first time, you might say, this is a bit of a peculiar exchange, but okay. And then this is where Glenn notes that his girlfriend is reading up about booby traps and other fun things like that. And Nancy says, I'm into survival. And if you didn't get the impression that Nancy is a final girl or that she is going to assume control, have agency over her actions, this is, to me, the turning point where she's like, can't rely on anybody but myself, so I need to study up.
Yeah, bitch is hardcore.
Truly. I mean, when you think about it, for her, for the character in this world, it is life or death.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, she's quite literally going more and more insane as she loses sleep.
Yeah, I mean, she's a high-functioning insomniac at this point. So she returns home and finds out that instead of, doing anything productive, Marge has installed bars on all of the windows.
This is overkill.
It's so extra. It's like, oh, Marge, baby, you live in this house by yourself. Maybe you're getting alimony from John Saxon, but was a huge security renovation part of your monthly budget?
I was going to say, this costs a good amount of money, I imagine. The metal ain't cheap.
Mm-hmm. It ain't cheap. And also, it was clearly a rush job because she got this all done while Nancy was out for a walk. So, she put in the speedy order. You need to get this done in the 20 minutes. My daughter is out talking with her chaste boyfriend. Also, Nancy's reaction to this, oh, gross. It's funny stuff. So Marge is waiting for Nancy. So she's going to come clean about the whole thing. So we go down to the mini boiler room in our basement. And this is where we get Fred's backstory. So he was a child murderer. He killed up to 20 children. Then he got caught, but got off on a technicality because somebody signed incorrectly. And this is where Marge and the other Elm Street parents took action into their own hands. They burned him alive, vigilante justice style.
So, again, I know the remake is the thing where it's okay, he actually was a child molester and a child murderer, and we don't do that in this film or really any of the other films. And I wasn't, because Craven does say, when he was coming up with what the backstory was going to be, he said, I think that the worst crime a person could ever commit is to harm a child. I think that is the absolute worst thing.
Yeah.
But he doesn't talk about the molestation factor of it. And I think
he wrote it into an early draft of the script, or he must have told people about it, because it does come up fairly frequently in behind the scenes lore, but I don't know that he ever actually wrote it into the script.
Let's see. Okay, initially, Fred Krueger was intended to be a child molester, but Craven eventually characterized him as a child murderer to avoid being accused of exploiting a spate of highly publicized child molestation cases that occurred in California around the same time of the film's production.
Okay, yeah. And honestly, a wise choice, because you don't want to get mired in that.
Well, and that's the thing, is the remake does, but it's just I don't even think it does it very well. It's
no.
It's not even offensive. It's just okay.
It's poorly executed.
Yeah.
It is tasteless. I remember we definitely took it to task, but it was also because they just kind of introduce it and then throw it away. And you and I both said, well, if you're going to do this, you need to do it better.
Yeah, you need to address it and talk about it a little bit. Especially when you have Nancy and whatever Kyle Gallner's character name is. They both are oh my God, we were both molested.
Yeah.
All right, moving on.
Yeah, okay, well, let's fight for our lives. No, I'm sorry, you cannot do it this way.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I'm fine with child killer here. And I mean, truthfully, we don't need the molestation factor here because that does also it makes it real dour.
It's too dark for a film that is dealing with darkness. We're still talking about somebody who killed 20 children, but also we're focusing on the here and now. And even though obviously Nancy and Glenn are children because they are not adults, they're teenagers, but they are people who can look out for themselves. Whereas the impression I get when we say, oh, he killed 20 children, the time period it would have taken place in if Marge was still an Elm Street parent, I have to assume he was killing young children.
Yes, but I imagine though it would have been when Nancy was the age of the kids that were getting killed.
Yeah.
Because I imagine all this was happening when Nancy was definitely alive. So I'm saying, 10... maybe 15 years ago?
I think the easiest way, and I'll be curious to see if people agree with us about this, but I think the little girls who are doing the jump rope are meant to be representative of his victims.
I think they are too. Absolutely.
So it's 5, 6. So it would have been, about 15 or 12 years ago.
Yeah.
Math. I don't do it.
I don't know. Whatever. But that's the thing, though. So Nancy's parents weren't they didn't have a kid that was murdered by Freddy. For all we know, they were doing this to protect their daughter.
Yeah, it was get the cul-de-sac crew together, drink a couple of Big Joes, and let's go deal with the problem.
Yes, exactly that.
That's a Cougar Town reference, by the way. That was not for you. That was for them.
Joe, I know it's a Cougar Town.
You know Cougar Town. Yes. Very funny show, folks.
It's all streaming on Hulu. Go watch it.
There we go. We're not being paid by Hulu, so.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So Marge is now that you know the truth, you know that Fred Krueger is dead, and we can all just relax and get a good night's sleep. Nancy's like, what the fuck are you talking about? So she calls Glenn, and Glenn is getting ready for bed, so he's wearing a crop top because it is the 80s. So between this and Sleepaway Camp, if I had been older in the mid-80s, I would have just instantly become gay. Because, again, Johnny Depp, horrible person now. We don't like him. And yes, obviously he is young-ish looking. He's an underage character in this movie. But, like, there's something about a person in a crop top where you're just like, the confidence, the sexiness. I like it.
Oh, I'd fuck him. Like, right now. Like, sure, let's go.
No, not right now. The Glenn of this movie.
I would fuck this version of Glenn.
There we go.
I guess, maybe when he's 18.
Yes. we would celebrate the 18th birthday with fuckery.
I think... wait. I just gotta find out. How old was Johnny Depp when he made this movie?
He's gotta be over 18.
He would have been 20 or 21 when they made this.
Totally legal.
So yeah, totally
We
fine.
sound horrendously offensive, and people have probably been like, you pervs. Anyway, we'll see how that comes out in the edit, won't we?
Yeah.
Anyway, so Nancy calls Glenn and she says, okay, here's the deal. I'm going to bring him out and I need you to help nail him. And this is, again, her word choice.
Yeah.
So we're really using the sexual euphemisms in this movie. But the problem is that Nancy is behind bars and Glenn is across the street. And Glenn's mom, who was played by Sandy Lipton, is treating her son like nothing is happening. No cares in the world because, sure, 2 of your friends are dead, but they died in random things. So she's just saying, hey, Glenn, baby, go to bed.
Yeah. I think Glenn's mom is more of a character than Glenn is. But his dad is the worst.
Well, his dad is so weird, right? To me, this is actually part of the social commentary, however light this film is, about people in the suburbs where they have kind of embraced this middle class ennui. So this guy clearly doesn't know a fucking thing about Nancy, but he's out there eye-fucking her from his front porch as she's looking at Glenn.
Mm-hmm.
And he just decides, I don't like her. So she seems insane. She probably shouldn't spend any more time around Glenn. You're like, sir, do you even know her name? So this guy is played by Ed Cow, by the way. So I think he's doing a good job in very, very few scenes. But when Nancy ends up calling Glenn to say, okay, so here's the plan. This is how it's going to work. This dad just goes, have a good night, Nancy, and hangs up the phone and then decides, oh, she'll just call back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the phone off the hook. And kids, this is not how phones work.
Well, yeah, it is.
It is to a point. If you left the phone off the hook, you would get a busy signal if you tried to call that number.
Yeah.
But you would also get a loud buzzing noise on the phone that would be like, oh, clearly that phone has been left off the hook. I need to put it back on the receiver. So he would have like drumming from this phone all night if he left it off the hook.
Oh, okay. Because I definitely had like this exact phone, the one that's in Glenn's house. It's like a little tan thing growing up, but I was a kid. Like I was a kid when I had it, so I never used it.
Yeah, like it would be.
Okay.
So anyway, the visual looks great. He's basically saying, I'm cutting off your line of communication. There will be no further interactions with you and Nancy. So we hop back over to Nancy. Marge is also trying to put her to bed, and possibly the funniest. I don't even know if it's meant to be a very funny joke, but I laugh every time this comes up. Marge says goodnight. Nancy pretends to go to sleep. The minute Marge is out of the room, Nancy pulls a full coffee maker with carafe from under her dresser.
And see, this is the same time when Marge is pulling a bottle of vodka out of the linen closet.
Yes. It is the Thompson women with their late night beverages, just pulling them out of the recesses of the house. It is so fucking funny. I just love it. It's not even like I pull out the coffee maker and brew myself a pot. The pot is already ready, which means the whole room would smell like coffee because she just brewed it. Unless she's drinking it cold from earlier that day. I don't know, but it's a hilarious visual of pulling out a full coffee pot. Anyway, so we're doing that. We're still taking Sta Awake, and it's gonna go well, but not for Glenn, because Glenn is watching the Miss Nude universe, and he falls asleep, and it's unceremonious. We don't, as you said earlier, we don't get to see any kind of dream. he just gets sucked into a hole in the bed. I do love that the TV falls in with him.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Right before this, though, this is when we get the I'm your boyfriend now Nancy phone call.
Oh, that is true. Yes. With the tongue.
Love the effect. Really good puppetry work on the tongue. But yes. So again, Glenn's death is so bizarre because his mom flat out walks in when the bed is spraying the blood geyser. And again, that's like a thing where it's like, wait, what? I guess we think we're watching Glenn in the real world sleep, but I guess we're in the nightmare with him. But then I don't know.
I think we're in the real world the whole
I don't know. Because, that's the thing. Like, there is a geyser of blood that shoots out in the real world. His mom walks in and sees it happening.
Yeah.
So, again, it's this thing where Freddy is also well, I guess that's the thing, right? So, the same way that Nancy can manipulate the dream world and bring it into the real world, Freddy can do the same thing,
I think he can. It's just that he's not visible to anybody who's not sleeping or dreaming of him. So we would see the impact, which is why we got to see Tina's body going up the wall and over the ceiling, and why we get to see Glenn's geyser blood spray.
Yeah, the physics of the dream world are bizarre.
Sure.
Now, Joe, I will give you one guess to tell me what movie, and specifically what moment in said movie, inspired the bed blood geyser.
Oh, okay. So clearly it had to be before 1984.
And it used a lot of blood. Maybe in slow motion, pouring out of something.
Oh, fuck off. Really? Okay, it makes perfect sense when you say it, and I do like it because it feels like it's doing its own version of it. Yes, okay, so this is the Shining Elevators.
It is. They used 220 gallons of fake blood that was made up of water, food coloring, and poster paint to thicken it.
Gross.
And again, yes, this is Tina's room repurposed, but yes, The Shining was the inspiration for this.
Okay, that is wild.
Well, so now, next time you complain about some fucking elevator in a movie with blood, we can say, do it like Nightmare on Elm Street. Make it your own.
Exactly that, right? Because this feels of a kin, but is doing it its own way. And I really like that. You know what? I will sign off on this one. I approve.
There you go. Put it in the book.
Because, that's what matters. My approval of this 40-year-old movie. This looks great. I love this effect. It's the kind of thing where I also am just like, wait, what? Like, this movie is going here. It's doing this. Because it feels so sudden.
There's something, too, about the score. We haven't mentioned the score, which is done by composer Charles Bernstein. But, like, he gets sucked down, and there's like a beat. There's like a beat before the blood starts flowing. And then we get that.
Yeah.
Love it.
It's very, very effective. Okay, so Glenn is dead, and we see that the paramedics have been called to the scene. Nancy is obviously aware that something bad has happened because she's watching out the bars of her windows. So her dad arrives on scene.
I love this moment when he walks inside, too, and we hear it's not even a character we know or see on screen, but we just hear someone go, "You don't need a stretcher up there, you need a mop."
Yeah. No, I like that line. That's why I used it off the top of the episode. But that accompanying the image, too, of this guy putting out a bucket to collect the blood that's dripping through the ceiling into the living room.
Well, and this is the thing where I'm like, y'all, how do you explain this?
Oh, he must have died by suicide? Like, that is not going to fly in this situation.
You can't even find body parts there. I mean,
where's the body?
Maybe they found his face a la Elizabeth Sparkle in The Substance.
That would be horrifying as well.
Yeah,
that actually would be very appropriate for Freddy, considering what he does to people.
Actually, what it would look like more, though, is it's Frank's face after he explodes in Hellraiser.
That too.
Yeah.
Okay, so Nancy ends up calling her father. Like, she calls because I guess we had put the phone back on the hook in Glenn's house. So she calls, asks for her dad, and says, okay, here's the thing. Fred Krueger's real. He's back. I'm going to get him for you. All I need you to do is break down the door in 20 minutes.
Okay.
That's all you got to do.
Joe. She Home Alone's this apartment. I know.
Truly.
This is before Home Alone. and then goes to bed. Are you telling me all the things she does to set up in this house
in 20
does in 20 minutes and still gives herself enough time to sleep and get in the dream and pull Freddy out just for her dad? Like this, I was
minutes.
like, you should have. This montage should have been before you called your dad.
Oh yeah, it does almost feel like we put things in the wrong order. But I'm so used to movies saying, okay, we've got 30 minutes to do, like when we talked about Salem's Lot and they said, okay, we'll meet at the church in 30 minutes. And then they go and have a full on fucking conversation around different parts of the town and still make it back to the church in 30 minutes. Like, no, come on.
Sure. But I'm watching it. I mean, she's fucking like screwing like hinges on things and bolts. I was like, this took hours to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And the problem is that you can't convincingly say she would have done it earlier because Marge is still up and around. Like at this point, Marge is more or less passed out, completely drunk on the couch. Like,
no. I do love when she touches around at that door and then the mom is just like, locked. I
mean, I love to hate this character so much.
Good. Yeah.
It's so good. But yeah, okay. So Nancy gives her father instructions, 20 minutes, and then we do all of these booby traps, and it is so Home Alone, and it's great because we see the ingenuity, we see that mention of studying booby traps really paying off. The fact that she is able to pull the gunpowder out of shotgun shells to put into this light bulb, I have questions about gun safety in this here house.
Yeah, but you know what? She read that survival book, so it's fine.
Yeah, I mean, she seems like a competent young woman, and we know that she's going to do great things before getting horribly murdered in a couple of movies.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, we've already jumped past the bed vodka. Okay. So, she goes into the dream world. So we hear Glenn's words about turning your back on the monster. We fade to black. We see Nancy coming down the stairs again. This is the closest we probably get to a transition into dreams from waking. But then she goes into the basement. She looks for Krueger's glove, which her mom had left in the home boiler, and it's not there anymore. And then all of a sudden, there's like 5 extra flights of stairs leading from her actual basement into this factory boiler room setting.
Oh, this is my favorite kind of thing when I'm taking notes too, because there's no notes to really be taking here because it's just Nancy walking around the boiler room for about 3 minutes.
Yeah, it's interesting because part of me thinks that this is all about the tension, right? We know that Fred is here somewhere, so we're waiting for the jump scare. We're waiting for him to burst out. But it's also just, hey, we've got this amazing looking set that is so well dressed. And we're at the point where we know we're about to go into the climax. So just stretch it out. So we do. Yeah. Like it's a lot of her just wandering around and creepy sounds. We're occasionally seeing Fred's face and so on. So it's very reminiscent of that first one where she burned herself in the classroom.
Right.
And then eventually, I mean, she's actually very panicked because she knows that she's running out of time. So she has to get her hands on him before that timer goes off. So she does see Tina's cross. She sees Glenn's bloody headphones. And then as she checks her time, this is where Fred attacks her. And we see her jump off of a ledge. And this is the shot I mentioned earlier where she jumps onto the rose bush. Mm-hmm. And the transition is seamless.
It's really good. Because I feel like another movie, like we would really be keeping an eye on the time on her watch. And I like that we don't do that. We only, I mean, obviously we know it's a thing where it's like, okay, she has to get this in like, I guess the 2 minutes that she has left over after doing all those booby traps. Mm-hmm. But I like that we're not just like constantly going back to her watch to build suspense. It's just the movie trusts us to know, hey, we have a limited amount of time until that alarm goes off.
Yeah, I think we get a 10-second warning after she picks herself up and she realizes, okay, he is actually in the rose bush with her. So yeah, she ends up leaping on him. So again, the first time when he burst out of her mirror, he jumped on her. He was the one with the power and the agency. And here it's her reclaiming that power and agency by jumping onto him instead to take control, bring him into the real world. So she's woken up by her alarms in her room all alone. And again, this delay, right? Like, did it work? We're not sure. She even has this moment where she says like, I thought that would work.
But we have the I'm crazy after all, like where she really believes for a moment, oh my God, I am insane.
Yeah. And of course, That's when he pops up.
Yeah, right from under the bed. It's great. He also says something, I don't know if it's right here, but it's in a bit, but he says, like, I'm going to split you in two, which
he does. Yeah, which I think is the most confronting thing that he'll say to anybody else. Like, at different points, he'll say, like, I'm going to kill you. And you're just like, okay, sure, Fred. And here it's like, okay, Art, take it down a Terrifier notch or two. Okay, so Fred is in the real world, which means he's playing Nancy's game now. So she deals her first blow. She hits him in the head with that coffee carafe. And then she runs outside. She locks the door. She puts up this like Looney Tunes mallet above the door so that when he opens it, he will release it. And she goes down. I do love that interspersed with her sort of dodging all the booby traps and getting them set up, she's breaking every window in sight and yelling at this Sergeant Parker guy, like, hey, you fucking asshole. Get my dad.
This is the one that's in Scream, but I love it. He's just like, maybe I better go tell the lieutenant. It's like, you think? You think?
Yeah, like there's a hysterical girl screaming for help. You're at the site of an unsolved, totally bizarre murder. And that's also your boss's daughter. And you're just like, dur, 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 dur. Like, maybe a little sense of urgency here, sir. Okay, so Freddy has used this opportunity to get out of her bedroom. He does get hit in the abdomen with this mallet thing. He ends up taking a spill over the banister so that he falls directly in front of her at the front door as she is screaming.
This. Yeah.
She hops over the tripwire that she set up as she runs into the living room. So he sets it off, and this is the explosive light bulb. So we get this great flash, and there's smoke, and he goes falling over. She breaks out another window, continues yelling. It's a whole to-do.
Yeah, I mean, this is an action-oriented climax.
And it's speedy, right? It's like, boom, booby trap, break a window, yell something, boom, booby trap. So at this point, no one is coming to save her, so she has to keep going. So she runs into the basement where she has a giant bottle of accelerant, gasoline. We're not really sure.
But I love this, though, because this also feels almost Scooby-Dooey in a way, where it's like they're downstairs and he's around the boiler, goes one way, and she like loops around and catches him from behind and sprays him down. It's funny, but it's awesome. And then we get this awesome like flame stunt.
Yeah, I will confess that this time I really noticed that this stuntman is either wearing a fuck ton of pads, or he has a very different body shape to Robert Englund, because Freddy has gained about 30 pounds since being set on fire. But
it also looks like he's wearing a Freddy mask and not Freddy makeup.
Yeah, which is tricky, right? Because maybe you don't want to burn.
Well, but I will forgive all of this because this was all done. I don't know if it was one take, but it was like a lot of this was like, actually, a lot of it was one take. Because even him running upstairs and rolling down, like he decided to do that. Like that wasn't going to be something, I guess, on the plan. But this is like a very seasoned fire actor.
Okay. Yeah.
And they were like worried, and then it was done, and he was like, "Oh, did we get it?" And they were like, "Are you okay?"
Oh my God. Because you're right. You know, this is sustained. So she sets him on fire. She runs up the stairs. He tries to follow her up. She slams the door. The slamming motion, in a bit of a slapsticky bit, ends up hitting him against the wall, so he falls back down the stairs. But yeah, it's just very convincing and effectively well done. But this is a sustained period of time, and yeah, like this guy rolls all the way down the stairs. So it's pretty impressive.
Pretty impressive. But luckily, Daddy comes over finally.
Well, because they see smoke coming out of the fucking house at this point. So yeah, they break down the door. And Nancy is there to greet them. And, you know, she's trying to say, hey, I've got him. We just need to get him. And they're just like, what? You crazy girl? So we go to the basement door, which is now open. And we follow flaming footsteps as they lead all the way up the stairs. And once again, Nancy is the one in control here because her father is like, oh, what's going on? Blah, blah, blah. And she immediately knows, oh, he's going after Mom. So she books it upstairs ahead of uniformed police officers. And we get this fantastic, horrible scene of Freddy. It honestly evokes a rape scene. He is on top of her on the bed, throttled, but he's still on fire.
Well, because I wrote in my notes, I was like, Freddy is humping her?
Yeah, like, what is he doing?
Yeah, but he has straddled her. It's a very odd image.
It's sexually charged.
Yes, but luckily it's fine. Dad covers him with a blanket, puts out the fire, and then Freddy's gone. But oops!
Sure.
Mom's charred up skeletal corpse has now been sinking in a hole in the bed.
Uh-huh. Yeah. The skeleton doesn't look incredibly convincing to me. Like, I like the look of it. It doesn't look real, but I kind of think it adds to the mystery, especially as we see it, sinking into this mattress in the same way that Glenn did, but slower.
Yeah.
So yeah, Freddy is apparently gone. Mom is also gone. The mattress is completely normal again. And Dad has no words. So Nancy just dismisses him because she knows it's not over.
And then Dad just leaves her in the bedroom.
Totally leaves. Like, we've come down very hard on Marge throughout most of this episode. Don also sucks. Like, he is a terrible absent father.
Well, and it's interesting, too, because he gets the mom's alcoholism in the third movie.
Oh, that's right. He does. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, I forgot about that.
I know. Although he's just at a bar, at least. He's not hiding booze around the house because he doesn't live with Nancy anymore.
Right. He's not doing bed vodka, is what you're saying.
Yes. Okay, so then we have basically the end of, well, not exactly the end of Freddy in this movie, but this is the end of Freddy.
Yeah, and I feel like this is a piece that people get really hung up on after they've seen some of the sequels because they feel like the rules are starting to change and that kind of stuff. So we bring back this Balinese dream skills principle that Glenn alluded to earlier. So Nancy deliberately turns her back on Freddy. She explains that she understands his secret. He is not real. This is a dream. She takes back all of the power that she gave him, which is just like a great feminist message in this 1984 film, women taking back agency from men. And she effectively says, like, you have no control over me. It's a very labyrinth kind of move. And then she takes a step towards the door to leave this space behind because he doesn't matter. And he goes to grab her and he falls through her and disappears.
I love to because she barely says it, but she's like, you're nothing. And then she turns around and she goes, you're shit. And
yeah.
I always thought it was really funny because your shit is the title of this scene on the DVD I used to have.
Oh, really? Okay, that's fun.
But yeah, it does. It just feels a little anticlimactic because it's like, I guess it took her this long to learn the Balinese dream skills, but I guess it's such a small part of the movie where if you miss that line of dialogue, you're going to be like, what the fuck is happening right now? And I mean, luckily, I guess they as you said, they have Glenn redo the voiceover later to remind her as we go into the climax, but it's still kind of like, so did you really need to do like all these booby traps? You couldn't have just been like power. But again, whatever. Yeah. It's just a little anticlimactic. But I guess we get the big fight like before this, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I think the people who wanted the big showdown were meant to get that from the action.
Yeah.
But it doesn't vanquish him in the way that we would normally see in other films. So I definitely understand the claim that you made about anticlimactic. Mm-hmm. But I can't help but love the message and how cerebral it is. It feels very in keeping with Wes Craven and what we know his philosophy of horror and how he approaches things. So in some ways, this feels like a really good marriage of, okay, I'm going to give them the horror that they want, but also I'm going to give them the intellect that I bring to the table.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, again, it's fine.
It's fine. Yeah.
And maybe I would be less bothered if like, I'm not bothered by this. It's just a thing where it's kind of like, oh, that's an interesting way to like end the movie. Well, although it's not over yet, but still.
Well, I think the reason that I forgive it maybe a little bit more than you is that this feels anticlimactic because we think, oh, she didn't do very much to get rid of him, and now he's just gone? ? And the reality is that she thinks that she has vanquished him by taking away his power, but then the very next scene proves he's not actually gone. So this didn't work.
Yeah, well, and again, but this ending was like a fight between Craven and Bob Shea because Shea wanted to set it up for a sequel, and Craven was like, no, that's going to cheapen the movie. I don't want to do that. Yeah. And there are like different endings. It's variations of the exact same epilogue we have here, where it's like, okay, like Nancy gets in the car. There's one where she goes away and everything's fine.
Right.
There's one where like Freddy's in the car with her driving when she turns.
Okay, yes, I've heard of that one.
And there is another one too. But honestly, I saw one where I was like, I can't even tell what the difference is between that and the actual ending. I have no idea what the difference is. But it's fine. But okay, last big laugh of the movie.
Okay.
The mom walks outside. You know, honey, I think I'm just going to stop drinking. Yep. I just don't feel like it anymore.
Didn't you know, Trace? It's just that easy.
I just don't feel like it anymore.
But I love that, you know, we talked early on about the sequence where we're introduced to the nursery rhyme and the girls and the Vaseline lighting and it's very stark and brightly lit. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're getting here too. Like, there's this moment where Nancy opens the door of her bedroom and
walks outside.
The match on action. Yeah, it's her and her mom, and they're picture perfect, and she doesn't have any wounds. She doesn't have the dark circles. The gray streak is gone. Her mom looks happy and healthy. So part of this is immediately evident. Oh, this is
wrong.
A dream. It's not real.
Well, but the interesting thing is, Joe, one of the original ending, I don't know if they ever filmed it or whatever, but it was going to be that the whole movie was all a nightmare.
No.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Boo. That would have been terrible.
Yeah. So like Nancy walks inside and she's like, oh, what a horrible nightmare I just had.
Yeah, I mean, because the mom even alludes to something like that, you know, oh, I guess when you hit rock bottom, you really do sort of forget everything that came before. And that's when she says, I'm going to stop drinking. And you think, okay, well, that seems convenient. But also, if this is a dream, then it doesn't logically need to make that much sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we get in the convertible and all of our friends are still alive. And then, yeah, the roof goes over and it's Freddy Colors. And then mom, well, a dummy version of Marge gets sucked through. And I love how not convincing this is because it just adds to everything. Yes,
it is hilarious. Unintentionally so, but I don't care because it works. Actually, it doesn't work because it's very clearly a dummy. But just the physics, it looks like she like weighs like paperweight, and she just like gets pulled through this window. It's really funny. It's a great ending.
Well, I mean, if we're talking about Who Framed Roger Rabbit because we reference Fleischer, maybe this is like again a Judge Doom kind of thing where she just becomes a cartoon and gets sucked through the front window here.
Oh my god! Also, I'm sorry, Joe, but like, have you ever seen Wes Craven's Deadly Friend?
I haven't.
Okay, so it's the one with Christy Swanson, which is like a robot and whatever.
Okay.
But basically, the whole idea behind this movie is that it was a teen movie that Wes Craven was making that was going to be PG-13, but then they test screened it and
they made him turn it into a horror film, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
So there's this robot BB that kind of becomes Christy Swanson. But anyway, Charles Fleischer is the voice of BB the robot in Deadly Friend.
Oh, wild. Okay. So,
it's just a weird connection.
So Wes Craven really did have his favorites.
He really did. But yeah. I love this movie. And honestly, it's a thing where it's not that I wasn't looking forward to revisiting it. It was just one of those things where I've seen this so many times. But again, I was just surprised at how quickly I was just wrapped back up into this and just really marveling at the sheer creativity on display with, again, that minimal budget.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. It just feels like the kind of thing that shouldn't be possible on a budget. And then you hear, oh, okay, we were having significant money issues. We didn't really know if this was going to happen. The fact that this movie comes out and is even half as good as it is, and instead it becomes a fucking classic.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. It's the kind of thing where I do feel the same way as you, where, yeah, I've seen it so many times, I don't even know if I have anything new to say about it, but then I rewatch it, get totally sucked back in. I will say there's a twinge of sadness because, as I said, this is my favorite 80s horror franchise. And this idea that we're probably not going to get another one, like that just, it's hard to watch this and be like, there's so much fucking potential in this idea. And to a certain extent, we watered down or we neutered the concept because we had to keep pumping them out and we had to get ludicrous with the special effects. But like this film is so effective at being grounded, as we've said. I don't understand how we can't get back to this. And people just need to let go of Robert Englund, who doesn't even want to play this role anymore.
No, and it was interesting because I was looking. So Bob Shaye stepped down from New Line in 2008, which is when Warner Brothers acquired it. And so, and then we get that remake 2 years later. And so I do wonder that without Bob, and especially not Wes Craven, like trying to like do something with this character. I mean, and that's the thing with the remake too, is like the remake really botches a lot of its nightmare sequences. Like,
oh yeah,
they're nowhere near as creative as like
no
90% of the stuff in any of the other films, even Freddy's Dead.
Yeah.
And so that's just the thing is like, I mean, if we ever get another Nightmare, which honestly at this point I'm just kind of like, ugh, maybe we just restart it. Like,
that's what I think. Like we've talked about Freddy's daughter because that would actually be in keeping with the mythology that we set up in Freddy's Dead. But I think you have to do away with the idea of Freddy Krueger and stick with something like a dream demon.
Yeah, I mean, because that's the thing. At the end of the day, I just want to see really cool nightmare sequences, like what this Freddy's is known for. I don't need Robert Englund. Again, Robert Englund is like approaching 80 if he hasn't already. So like, no.
Yeah, it's absolutely no shade to him or anything.
No.
It's just he's done this. He doesn't want to do it anymore. And also, I don't think physically he would be a great fit for it anymore. Like, it's time to pass the baton on to a different version of this kind of character.
He also hasn't played this role or been in, I guess he's maybe been in the makeup, I'm assuming, for con appearances, but like he hasn't played this role in a movie for 21 years. Freddy vs. Jason was the last one.
Yeah. Yeah.
So... Anyway, well,
there, that's our soapbox for this episode.
That's our soapbox. All right, everyone. Well, yeah, that is A Nightmare on Elm Street. Before we announce what we're covering next week, just some quick housekeeping. If you want to get in touch with us, you can reach us on Twitter and Instagram at HorrorQueers. Shoot us an email at horrorqueers@gmail.com. Find us on Letterboxd to keep track of all the films we've covered. If you want to chat with other listeners, please join our Facebook Horror Queers group. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We love that. And if you want even more content, please support the show by becoming a patron at patreon.com/horrorqueers. If you subscribe today, you will get 342 hours of Patreon content, including this month's new episodes on Hannibal Season 1, Episode 11, Time Cut, Heretic, Smile 2, and a brand new audio commentary on Silent Night, Deadly Night, as we said, for its 40th anniversary.
Yes, Christmas comes early.
Very much so. But Joe.
Yes.
What are we talking about next week?
So it's funny that you managed to sneak in a reference to Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, and then we both said, oh, people may not know who those people are. Well, we're only going to cover half of the equation, but we will be talking about Ginger Rogers when we come back next week, because we're going to talk about The 13th Guest from 1932.
1932. This is going to be a first-time watch for me, and I am quite excited because I really want to know what and I quote, a pre-code mystery comedy thriller is in 1932.
With apparently some queer content.
But everyone, until next week, we can cross out A Nightmare on Elm Street and our Diva Anniversaries theme.
Boy, 8 weeks later. Yes. Hope you folks had fun. And with that said, we'll cross out Horror Queers.